Hey everyone! Welcome back to Horcrux Harry. Get ready for an amazing tale. Fleur Gabrielle and Hermione met Harry at age 10 and Veela magic declared him their shared mate. Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The Marketplace and the Match. The school trip to Lyon was supposed to be about the Roman amphitheater. Harry knew this because Mrs. Fig, not his Mrs. Fig, a different one, a younger one who taught history and wore scarves regardless of weather, had said so approximately 14 times on the coach from Calais, her voice climbing slightly each time as though repetition would manufacture enthusiasm, and the 32 10-year-olds slumped in their seats around her. The Roman amphitheater. Built in 15 BC. Exceptional state of preservation. Really, children, this is a privilege. Harry sat near the back, forehead against the window, watching France roll past in shades of gold and green. He had never been out of England before. The Dursleys didn't holiday with him. He stayed with Mrs. Fig, the actual one, the cat-smelling one in Privet Drive, and school trips until now had been local affairs. The Natural History Museum, a farm with disinterested goats, once a factory that made biscuits and smelled exactly the way you'd hope. But this trip required a permission form, and Aunt Petunia had signed it without reading it, which Harry had come to understand as the safest kind of permission. He wasn't thinking about the Roman amphitheater. He was thinking about the market. He'd spotted it from the coach window as they crossed the bridge over the Saône, a long, sprawling marketplace tucked against the riverside, all colored awnings and a distant flash of things that caught the light wrong. Too bright. The kind of brightness that came from inside rather than from the sun hitting a surface. Harry had noticed things like that his whole life. Light that didn't behave. Shadows that moved a half-second late. He'd learned not to mention it. The market wasn't on Mrs. Fig the Younger's itinerary. But when they stopped for lunch in a square near the river, bread and cheese and small cartons of juice that the students treated with the gravity of a religious experience, Harry finished his in 4 minutes, drifted naturally toward the edge of the group the way water drifts toward a drain, and then simply wasn't there anymore. He wasn't running. He walked like he had somewhere to be, hands in his pockets, following the pull of the river smell and the wrong bright light, and no one came after him because no one ever really tracked where Harry was in a crowd. It was, he had come to understand, one of the useful things about being the kind of person adults looked past. The market was called the Marché de Merveilles. He didn't know that yet. He found the name later, painted on a wooden arch he'd walked under without fully registering, dark green paint, slightly peeling, with small golden stars worked into the letters that moved if you weren't looking directly at them. The marketplace unfolded beyond it in a way that didn't quite match the space it occupied, the stalls going back further than the riverside should have allowed, the light tilting at an angle that had nothing to do with where the sun was. Harry stopped walking and looked around. There were people. Lots of them, but quieter than a normal market, talking in low voices, handling things carefully, the way people handle things they know the value of. A woman in deep violet robes was weighing something luminous in brass scales. A man with a beard plaited into 3 separate braids was arguing pleasantly with a teenage boy over a jar that appeared to be full of frozen lightning. An old woman sat on a folding chair eating an apple, and every time she took a bite, the core of it glowed briefly amber before fading. Harry stood there and breathed. He felt, for the first time in his life, like he was in the right place. He started walking again, slower now, past the stalls selling what the handwritten sign called lunettes de vérité, glasses, dozens of them, in every shape, some of which he was fairly sure had extra lenses in directions that didn't exist. Past a table stacked with books whose titles rearranged themselves while he watched. Past a small cart where a girl about his age was haggling aggressively in French with a vendor over a brass compass that spun its needle in patterns Harry was certain had nothing to do with North. He stopped to watch the haggling. The girl had brown hair pulled back from her face in a way that suggested it had started the day in a neater arrangement, and she'd walked through it into its current state through sheer velocity. She was wearing a striped shirt, ordinary jeans, trainers that were slightly too large, and she was talking very fast, in French that Harry couldn't follow, but the structure of it was familiar, the specific cadence of someone who has done their research and is now deploying it as a weapon. He recognized it because he'd heard it in his own head, in English, during every situation in his life where he needed to think faster than the people around him. The vendor, a heavy-set man with a magnificent copper mustache, looked equal parts beleaguered and impressed. The girl pointed at a small crack in the compass casing. The vendor waved his hand. She pointed again, more specifically. He sighed. She named a price. He named a higher one. She began to put the compass down. He named her price. She took the compass with the kind of satisfaction that other people express loudly. She just straightened slightly, tucked it into her jacket, and turned, and found Harry watching. She didn't seem embarrassed. She looked at him the way people look at a problem, with interest. "You're not French," she said. British accent, slightly southern. "Neither are you," Harry said. "I'm here with my parents. They're dentists. There's a conference." She looked around the market with the expression of someone compiling information in real time. "They think I'm at the cafe. I saw this through a doorway that wasn't there this morning." "Same," Harry said. "More or less. Do you know what this place is?" "No. Do you?" She considered this. "I've been reading about places like this. I thought they were theoretical. Or historical. Pockets of, there's a term, in a book I found, marches magiques, though that might be an older usage." She stopped herself. "You're not going to think I'm strange." It wasn't a question. She'd already assessed him somehow and reached that conclusion. "I've been watching a jar of lightning for about 5 minutes," Harry said. "I think we're past that." Something in her posture shifted, the particular relaxation of someone who has been braced for dismissal and just had it not happen. She put out her hand. "Hermione Granger. Harry Potter." They shook hands, which was slightly formal for two 10-year-olds in a magical market in Lyon, but somehow fitted exactly right. "Want to look around?" Hermione asked. They went together, which was easier than going separately and also felt, in a way Harry couldn't name yet, correct. Hermione narrated as they walked, not in the exhausting way of someone who talks to fill space, but the genuinely interesting way of someone who thinks out loud and doesn't mind you hearing the process. She'd noticed things he'd missed. He'd noticed things she hadn't. Between them, they built a reasonably complete picture of the market in about 20 minutes. It was, as far as either of them could tell, a place where magical goods were traded openly. Some of the sellers were clearly human, or mostly human, or human-adjacent. Some of them were less clearly so. There were no signs explaining any of this. It seemed to function on the assumption that if you'd found your way in, you already understood the basic terms. "There are supposedly magical communities throughout Europe," Hermione said, pausing in front of a stall selling what looked like bottled sounds. The labels read things like Orage d'Eat and Voix de Mer. "Britain has one. I haven't been there, obviously. I only found out any of this was real about 4 months ago when I accidentally set my neighbor's hedge on fire by being annoyed at it. But I've been reading. What happened to the hedge? It grew back, which is strange because hedges don't generally." She stopped. Tilted her head. "Do you do things? Accidental things? When you're upset or surprised or yes," Harry said simply. "How long?" "Always. Since I can remember." Hermione looked at him with an expression that was almost relief. "Me too. I thought." She stopped again. Started over. "I thought I was the only one who didn't have a word for it yet." Harry opened his mouth to respond. And then the silver light hit them. It came from the far end of the market, not a flash, not a burst, more like a tide. A warm, low, extraordinarily bright pulse of light that moved through the stalls like a wave through water, touching everything and making it briefly, beautifully more itself. The bottled sounds rattled. The book's titles froze mid-rearrangement. The vendor with the copper mustache looked up sharply. Harry felt it in his chest, which was a strange place to feel light. Beside him, Hermione had gone very still. They both turned toward the source. She was at the far end of the central lane, standing near a stall that sold what appeared to be silk in colors that didn't have names, and she was 10 years old, silver blonde hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a pale blue dress that seemed slightly too formal for a market visit but suited her the way formal things suit people who've grown up in them. She was arguing with a woman who was clearly her mother. The resemblance was absolute, the same silver gold hair, the same quality of light around her, though the mother's was more controlled, more settled, and her argument involved her pointing at something in the stall with a kind of focused intensity that struck Harry as familiar. Then she turned. Not because she'd heard them. Not because she'd seen them. She turned the way a compass turns, without deliberate choice, toward the thing it is built to find. Her eyes were blue-gray and very clear, and when they landed on Harry and Hermione, something happened in the air between the three of them that had no comparison in Harry's experience. It was like a sound that was too low to hear but not too low to feel, a resonance, a recognition, the sensation of a key turning in a lock you didn't know was inside you. The silver-blonde girl went perfectly still. Her mother noticed immediately. She stopped mid-sentence, looked at her daughter, then followed her daughter's gaze across the market to two British children standing near a stall of bottled sounds, one of them with messy black hair and round glasses and a lightning bolt scar on his forehead that the woman clocked with sudden, sharp attention. "Fleur," the mother said. Quietly. Very carefully. The girl, Fleur, wasn't listening. She had already started walking. Harry stood where he was. He wasn't afraid. He was 10 years old, and he'd been afraid of a lot of things in his life. Uncle Vernon's temper, the dark cupboard, the particular silence that meant something bad was about to happen. But whatever was walking toward him across the marketplace with silver hair and complete self-possession wasn't something to be afraid of. He couldn't have explained this. He simply knew it with the same confidence with which he knew his own name. Beside him, Hermione had not moved either. He could see, without looking at her directly, that her hands had relaxed. She'd been holding the new compass in both hands since she bought it, and now she was holding it in one, easily, as though she'd stopped needing something to hold on to. Fleur stopped 2 feet away. She looked at Harry first, that particular blue-gray gaze, measuring and warm and strange. Then Hermione. Then back to Harry. She said something in French, low and quick, and her mother, who had arrived beside her with the silent speed of someone who has spent years keeping up with their child, made a short, almost involuntary sound. "Maman," Fleur said. Not a question. A statement, firm and clear. "I know what this is." Fleur, nous ne savons pas, je sais ce que c'est. She looked back at Harry and Hermione. Switched languages without hesitation. "I am Fleur. Fleur Delacour." A beat, during which she seemed to make a decision about how to proceed. "You felt it too?" "Yes," Harry and Hermione said simultaneously, with identical certainty. Fleur blinked. For a moment, just a moment, her composure cracked into something that looked like 10 years old and overwhelmed, and then it assembled itself again. But Harry had seen it. He filed it away carefully, the way you file away the important things. "I am part Veela," Fleur said. "My grandmother was full Veela." When a Veela's magic recognizes, there is a word for it, in French, reconnaissance. She glanced at her mother. "Recognition," Apollon Delacour said softly. She was watching Harry and Hermione with an expression that was simultaneously odd and careful, and something else Harry couldn't name. L'appel de l'âme. Then, in English, because she had registered that the boy understood nothing. The soul's call. When a Veela's magic recognizes a soul match, it announces itself. She paused. It is typically singular. One match. In 300 years of our family's history, it has always been singular. Silence. "Both of us?" Hermione said. "Both of you," Apollon confirmed, and her voice had a careful quality, like she was picking her way across uncertain ground. "I have never." She stopped. Started again. "I have heard of dual recognition once. In texts that are very old. It is not." She looked at Harry, at the scar, at something behind his eyes that adults kept noticing without being able to say what it was. It is not random. Veela magic does not make mistakes. Fleur was still watching them both. She had the air of someone who has received unexpected news and is processing it with more grace than most adults would manage. "We should sit," she said. "Yes? There is a cafe. I would like to know your names." "Harry," Harry said. "Harry Potter." The name landed on Apollon like a stone in still water. Her eyes widened, fractionally controlled, and she looked at her daughter with an expression that said of course it is him, with a mixture of resignation and something close to awe. Fleur, for her part, simply nodded. As though Harry Potter was adequate information and she was satisfied with it. "Hermione Granger," Hermione said. "I'm Muggle-born. I only found out, I've worked out that I can do things, but no one has officially." She paused. "Is Muggle-born the term for someone born to non-magical parents?" Apollon said. "Yes. And it matters to some people, and to others it does not." She looked at Hermione with a warmth that was deliberate. "It does not matter to Veela magic. If it mattered to Veela magic, you would not be standing here." Hermione straightened slightly. Just slightly. Like something had been relieved. They went to the cafe. It was a small one, tucked between two stalls, with chairs that adjusted themselves when you sat and a menu written in at least 6 languages, only one of which Harry recognized. Fleur and Apollon sat on one side of a round table. Harry and Hermione sat on the other. A small creature that Harry thought might be a house elf but wasn't quite brought them tea and something pastry adjacent, and then became very busy elsewhere. "Tell me about yourself," Fleur said to Harry. Direct, uncomplicated, the way only very confident people ask personal questions. Harry told her. More than he'd ever told anyone, not everything, not the cupboard, not the worst parts, but the shape of his life. The Dursleys. The strange things that kept happening. The fact that he'd known since he was very small that the world was larger than the version adults showed him, and that he'd been waiting, without knowing what he was waiting for, to find the larger version. He told it plainly, without self-pity, because self-pity was a luxury the Dursleys had trained out of him, and he'd found, over the years, that he didn't miss it. Fleur listened. She did not say "I'm so sorry" or look at him with the particular soft expression that he'd gotten from teachers occasionally, the expression that was pity wearing the costume of sympathy. She listened the way someone listens when they're genuinely interested, her chin on one hand, her eyes on his face. "And you?" she said when he finished. "I don't want anything from you," Harry said. He wasn't sure where it came from. But it felt like something that needed to be said. "Because of whatever this is. The bond. I'm not going to, I just want you to know that." Fleur studied him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "If you wanted something from me, the magic would not have chosen you." Hermione had been talking to Apollon in a rapid, focused undertone. Questions, Harry guessed, research questions, the kind she'd been storing up since she'd set the hedge on fire. Now she surfaced. "Apollon, Madame Delacour, the bond, the recognition, you said you'd seen it described in old texts. What does it do exactly? Is it compulsory? Can it be refused? What are the legal implications under?" "I'm sorry, I don't know the magical legal framework. There is no legal framework for this," Apollon said, with the slight smile of someone who finds Hermione exactly as delightful as Hermione suspects she is not. "It is old enough to predate most law. And no, it is not compulsory. It cannot be refused, but it can be ignored. The bond will exist regardless. But it requires tending, like anything living. It requires," she thought, "honesty. Proximity at first. Trust." She looked between the three of them. "You are children. This is not a love story yet. It is a recognition. The understanding that these specific souls are meant to know each other too." She paused on the French word that didn't translate cleanly. "To make each other more fully themselves. What grows from that is your own business. But the recognition is real. Harry looked at Fleur. Fleur looked at Harry. Then they both looked at Hermione, who was scribbling something in a small notebook she had produced from somewhere, lips pressed together in concentration, and who looked up to find them both watching her and said, entirely unembarrassed, "I'm taking notes. This is important." Harry smiled. He didn't do that often, not really, not the kind that started from somewhere genuine. But he did then. "Yes," he said. "It is." Fleur was watching them both with that same contained, clear-eyed look. And then she said something Harry would remember for the rest of his life. "I have always been the strange one. Too bright. Too much. Everyone is either afraid of me or they want something from me because of what I am." She said it without drama, as pure fact. "It is," she searched for the word. "Lonely." "Yes. Lonely. And your magic came to mine and it said these ones." A pause. "It has good taste." Hermione laughed, a genuine one, surprised out of her. "That might be the most confident thing anyone's ever said about us. Is it wrong?" Hermione considered this seriously. "No," she admitted. They stayed at the cafe for 2 hours. Apollon answered questions until Hermione ran out of notebook pages. Fleur and Harry found, somewhere in the middle of the second hour, that they were talking about flying. Harry had never been on a broom, but he'd always suspected he would be good at it, and Fleur had been on a broom twice and described it with an intensity that suggested she thought about it more than she mentioned. They discovered they both had a deep, inarticulate preference for being in high places. They couldn't say why. It simply felt accurate to who they were. Hermione, whose relationship with heights was more ambivalent, redirected the conversation to the nature of magical schools, and this was when Apollon gently mentioned that Fleur was enrolled at Beauxbatons Academy, a wizarding school in the south of France. "And you too," Apollon said, looking at Harry and then Hermione, "will likely receive letters from Hogwarts. In England." "Yes? I haven't received a letter," Hermione said quickly. Do Muggle-born children get, when you are 11?" Apollon said. "Hogwarts sends a representative, or a letter. You will receive it." Harry had not thought about magic school as a real thing before. It opened in his mind now like a room he hadn't known was in the house. "They're different schools," Harry said. "Not a question, exactly." "They are," Apollon confirmed. And she looked at her daughter, and something passed between them, that specific parent and child shorthand that is entirely wordless. Fleur looked at Harry and Hermione. Then she looked at her mother. "How different?" she said. "Truly different? Or the kind of different where someone determined could, Fleur, how different?" Apollon sighed, which was its own answer. Outside, Lion was doing the late afternoon thing cities do in summer, the light going golden, the air holding the day's heat, and none of them had noticed the time passing. Harry became aware, with distant alarm, that he had been absent from his school group for well over 2 hours and that this should probably concern him more than it did. "I have to go back," he said. "Yes." Fleur didn't look upset about this. She looked like someone who has already decided what happens next, and is simply waiting for the other relevant parties to catch up. "Give me your address." Harry pulled a pen from his pocket, he always carried one, old habit, and wrote on a paper napkin. "Number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey." He hesitated, then added, "They'll confiscate anything interesting. Send it plainly if you can." He slid the napkin across. Fleur read it. Her jaw tightened, very slightly, at the implication of confiscate. She did not say anything about that. She took the napkin and folded it precisely and put it somewhere in the formal blue dress that apparently had pockets, and Harry filed that away too because he'd met very few people who kept their reactions to themselves for someone else's benefit rather than their own. Hermione had produced a second napkin and was writing her own address. She handed it to Fleur and then, thinking about it, wrote Harry's address on another piece and handed that to him. "In case," she said. "In case," Harry agreed. They stood outside the cafe, the three of them, while Apollon paid inside with coins that didn't look like any currency Harry had seen. The market moved around them, indifferent, carrying on. "This is real," Hermione said. She was looking at the compass she'd bought, which was spinning its needle in the same patterns as before. She tilted it. The needle tracked, paused, and then pointed in a new direction, not north, clearly not north, more like a different axis entirely. She tilted it again and the needle didn't waver. She looked up. "It's pointing at you," she told Harry. Harry looked at the compass. He looked at Hermione. "Does it do the other direction?" She turned it. The needle swung, held, pointed at him from a different angle. "Oh," she said quietly. He took the compass from her, she let him, and turned it until it pointed at Fleur, who had rejoined them from the cafe doorway and was watching this with her arms slightly crossed and her expression suggesting she was doing significant internal processing. The needle pointed straight and steady. "Veela magic," Harry said, holding the compass out to Fleur. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she took it from him, held it herself, and the needle spun, twice, 3 times, and pointed at Harry, and held, and then shifted, almost tenderly, toward Hermione. "Oui," Fleur said softly. "C'est ça." She handed the compass back to Hermione, who took it with the careful hands of someone who understands they're holding something that has just become much more than a market purchase. Apollon appeared in the doorway. She looked at the 3 children with an expression that Harry would, years later, think of as the specific mixture of grief and joy that parents have when they understand their child's life has just changed in a way that can't be undone, and that changed is not the same as ruined, but it is still changed. "We are at the Hotel de la Lumière," she said, to Harry and Hermione. "Until Sunday. If there is a way to, if your parents..." She addressed this to Hermione, since Harry's situation was clearly more complicated. "Perhaps tomorrow? There is much to discuss, and I would feel better speaking with other adults." Hermione nodded. "I'll tell them I met a French girl and want to visit. They'll say yes. They're very encouraging about cultural exchange." "A beat. I might not mention the magic. Yet." "Wise," Apollon agreed. Harry looked at Fleur. "I can't come tomorrow," he said. The group. He was already calculating. The coach left Sunday morning, which meant he had today and Saturday, and that was all. "But I'll write. When I get home." "I know," Fleur said. "Do you?" She met his eyes. "You are not someone who does not do what he says." Not a compliment, not really. An observation delivered as fact. Harry looked back at her steadily. "Neither are you." Something crossed her face, fast, gone before he could name it, and then the composure returned, smooth and cool and silver, and she nodded once. He walked back through the market, past the jar of frozen lightning and the brass scales and the arch with the moving stars, and back into the regular lion afternoon, and found his school group at a table in a square near the Saône where Mrs. Fig the younger was in the middle of explaining something about Roman architecture to an audience of 9 children, the other 23 apparently having drifted to their own interests in the way of 10-year-olds everywhere. She looked up when Harry rejoined the group. Gave him the slightly too long look of a teacher who suspects something but can't prove it. "Feeling better?" she said. She'd assumed he'd had a stomach thing, apparently. "Yes," Harry said, sitting down. "Much better." He sat with his elbows on the table, hands loose, looking at the square without seeing it. Inside his chest, something that had always been tightly wound, something he'd never quite had a name for, a vigilance, a readiness, the particular tension of someone who has spent their whole life braced for the next thing, had eased. Not vanished, but eased. Like a compass needle finding its direction. He thought about silver hair and gray-blue eyes and complete composure with a crack in it, just for a moment. He thought about a girl with a striped shirt and fast hands and a notebook she'd run out of pages in. He thought about the way the warm light had moved through the market. He thought, something has started. He didn't know what yet. Didn't know what it would cost or where it would go. Didn't know about the schools or the letters or the politics that would try to own what the 3 of them were. Didn't know about Umbridge or Lucius or the chamber under Hogwarts, or any of the rest of it. But he had spent 10 years being the boy nobody saw, and now something ancient and alive and very powerful had looked across a marketplace in Lyon and seen him. And it had said, "These ones?" And he had felt, for the first time in his life, the absolute absence of doubt. He reached into his pocket and touched the paper napkin. Hermione had thought to give him Fleur's hotel name too, he realized, written small in the corner, and then he straightened up and looked at the Roman square and the lion's sun and thought, right then. Let's see what we are. Chapter 2, Letters and Lightning. The first letter arrived on a Thursday. Harry knew it was Thursday because Thursday was the day Uncle Vernon left for work at 6:15 instead of 7, which meant the kitchen was available earlier, which meant Harry could eat breakfast while it was still hot rather than picking at the cooling remains of whatever Dudley had decided he didn't want. He'd been home from Lyon for 11 days and had been watching the post with a focus that he kept very carefully off his face whenever anyone else was in the room. The owl came through the kitchen window. This was, objectively, alarming. It was a small barn owl, neat and self-important, and it dropped a letter onto the kitchen table with the air of an entity that had done this 1,000 times and found it beneath comment. Then it sat on the back of a chair and waited. Harry picked up the letter. His name was on the front in handwriting that slanted elegantly to the right, and used more loops than strictly necessary. Monsieur Harry Potter, No. 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. No stamp. No return address. The envelope was cream-colored and smelled faintly of something floral that he couldn't name. He opened it. Dear Harry, I debated for several days how to begin this letter, which is unusual for me. I am generally not someone who debates. I decided the best approach was to simply begin, so, I have thought about the market every day since Sunday. Not obsessively. I am being precise. I have thought about it the way you think about something that has rearranged you, and you are still finding the new configuration. My mother has spoken to me at length about the bond. She knows more than she said at the cafe. She was being careful, which is also her nature. I will tell you what she told me, but not in this letter. This letter I wanted to write myself, without explanation. Just to say, I am glad it was you. Both of you. I did not know I needed to say that until I wrote it. Hermione has already written to me. She is remarkable. She had 7 questions in her first letter, 4 of which were better than anything my mother has been asked by adults. I am enclosing her address in case you do not already have it, though I suspect you do. She seems like someone who thinks ahead. Right back. The owl's name is Lumiere. She is bad-tempered but reliable. Fleur. Harry read it twice. Then he looked at Lumiere, who looked back at him with orange eyes that suggested she had opinions about being kept waiting. Right, Harry said. Give me a minute. He didn't have parchment. He didn't know that parchment was the done thing yet, so he wrote back on a piece of lined notebook paper in his neatest handwriting, which was still fairly scruffy but legible. Fleur, I've been watching for your letter since I got back. Didn't want to say that first because it seemed like too much to lead with, but you were honest, so I will be too. I'm glad it was you both, too. I've been thinking about how to explain what the market felt like before I found you and Hermione, and the closest I can get is, like being in the right place for the first time. Not happy exactly, more like correct. Like a thing in me had been turned the wrong way and the market turned it right. Tell me what your mother said. All of it. I can handle it. Tell me about Beau's batons too. I want to know what magic school looks like. Harry. P.S. Lumiere is staring at me. I think she's contemptuous. I respect it. He fed the owl a piece of toast, which she accepted as her due and departed with, and then he went upstairs to his cupboard and lay on his cot, and stared at the low ceiling and felt something warm and certain sitting in the middle of his chest. Hermione's letter came the following Tuesday, by a different owl, a tawny one that seemed more cheerful and slightly confused by the Dursleys' house, tilting its head at everything. Harry, I have been doing research. An enormous amount of research. I found 3 books at a used bookshop that turned out to contain actual magical theory. They were misfiled under folklore, which I think is either an accident or a deliberate concealment strategy, and between those and what Apollon told me on Saturday, she spent 2 hours with me and my parents on Saturday. My parents were very calm about it, which surprised me until Apollon pointed out that dentists deal regularly with human fear and pain and tend to be practical people. Dad asked 4 questions, all of which were very sensible. Mum asked about whether it was hereditary and then apologized for the question, which Apollon said was completely unnecessary. Here is what I know so far: the Veela soul bond, the full term is recognition d'aim, is not mind control, and it is not an external force that compels anything. It is better understood as a magical attunement. Like 3 instruments tuning to the same frequency. We will always be able to find each other. We will always be more ourselves when we're together than when we're apart, not less ourselves, more. This is the part one keep thinking about. I have spent a lot of my life being told I am too much. And the first magical thing that happened to me specifically said, no, you are the right amount, for these specific people. I know that's probably not how it works mechanically, but that's what it feels like. The bond strengthens with proximity and weakens with sustained separation, which means we need to be at the same school. I've been thinking about this. I don't know what your situation is regarding schools. Fleur mentioned you had some complications at home. But if you're in England, you'll be going to Hogwarts. And I'll be going to Hogwarts. But Fleur is enrolled at Beaux-Batons, which is in France. I don't think this is acceptable. Write back. And write to Fleur. She won't say she's waiting, but she is. Harry wrote to both of them that night. He told Hermione she was right about the school problem and that he was already thinking about it. He told Fleur about the books Hermione had found and asked if she had access to French magical literature about the bond. He asked her, more carefully, about Beaux-Batons, whether she actually wanted to go there, or whether it was simply the arranged thing. Her reply came 4 days later and was the longest letter he'd received. She did not answer the Beaux-Batons question directly. Instead, she wrote 3 paragraphs about the school, its architecture, its traditions, the particular social politics of an institution where Veela blood carried a specific and complicated status, and Harry read those 3 paragraphs and understood that she was answering the question without answering it, that she was showing him the thing rather than naming it. And what she was showing him was that Beaux-Batons was a place where she would always be the Veela girl. Known before she opened her mouth. Managed rather than engaged with. Beaux-Batons is beautiful, she wrote, near the end. And it would be very convenient. And I would learn excellent magic there, I think. But she didn't finish the sentence. The dash sat at the end like an open door. Harry wrote back, you don't have to finish that sentence. I understood. Then, Hermione is right. We need to be at the same school. I don't know how to make that happen yet. But I'm going to find out. He spent the next 2 weeks at the local library researching international school transfers. The librarian, a patient woman named Mrs. Patel who had long since accepted that Harry's research requests would never be normal, helped him find what she could, which turned out to be nothing specifically useful because the information he needed didn't exist in any Muggle library. What he found instead was a book on European educational law, which was boring but taught him something about how bureaucratic systems were structured, which turned out to matter later. In the meantime, the 3 of them wrote. By August, they were writing every other day. Sometimes every day. The letters established rhythms. Hermione tended to write in the afternoon, long and detailed and organized into sections without using actual headings, which Harry found funny. Fleur tended to write late, her handwriting slightly looser in the evening letters, the loops more pronounced, as though she relaxed in the dark in ways she didn't in daylight. Harry wrote when he could, which was usually early morning or late night, in the cupboard or in the kitchen, and he wrote the way he learned to think, practically, directly, and with more honesty than most people expected from someone who'd spent 10 years learning to be unreadable. They talked about everything. Magic, what they'd each done, how it felt, the differences in how it manifested. Hermione's magic was precise and responsive to logic. Harry's was instinctive and tended toward protection. Fleur's was warm and reach, when she let it, which she was carefully learning to let it. They talked about books. About flying. About what they wanted from magic school. About what they were afraid of. This one took longer, required more trust, arrived naturally rather than being asked for directly. Hermione was afraid of failing to understand something that mattered. Harry was afraid of becoming the kind of person who needed saving. He wrote this at 2 in the morning and almost didn't send it, and then sent it because he decided when he wrote the first letter that he was going to be honest, and he wasn't going to start making exceptions. Fleur's response to that letter came in 2 days, which was fast for cross-channel post, and it said, "I have spent my life being looked at and not seen. You have spent yours being overlooked entirely. We are, I think, the same problem from different angles. The difference is, I think you have been saving yourself for 10 years without anyone noticing." I noticed. He read that letter 4 times. Then he put it in the loose floorboard under his cot with the other ones. Fleur's fear, when she shared it, and she waited longest, because she was the most private, was simpler and more painful than either of them expected. She was afraid that everything people felt around her was the Veela magic. That no one had ever chosen her without being influenced. That she would never know. Hermione wrote back first, "The bond chose us. The Veela magic recognized us. But what I feel when I read your letters has nothing to do with ambient charm. It's specific to you, the way you think, the way you argue, the fact that you use em-dashes instead of commas when you're emotional. That's not magic. That's you?" Harry wrote, "I was in the market before you turned around. I wasn't under any spell. I just thought, that's someone who knows how to fight for something without making noise about it. I want to know that person. That was my thought. Your magic had nothing to do with it." The reply from Fleur was very short. It said, "Merci." And then, below that, "I think we should go to the same school." Below that, in smaller writing, like an afterthought that wasn't, "I have already begun asking questions." The Beauxbatons letter arrived for Fleur in late June. They were writing closely enough now that she told him about it the day it came, a formal ivory envelope with the school's crest in blue and gold. It sat on the Delacour kitchen table while Fleur looked at it, and thought about Beauxbatons and about a marketplace in Lyon and about a compass needle that had learned a new direction. Apollon watched her not open it for most of a day and finally said carefully, "It is your choice, Fleur." "I know," Fleur said. "The transfer process to Hogwarts is possible, but it requires— What does it require?" Apollon sat down. "A formal application to the Hogwarts Board of Governors. A letter from the transferring institution. Beauxbatons would need to release your enrollment, which Director Maxime may or may not do willingly. A ministry notification in both France and Britain. And," she paused, "because of the bond, there will be documentation required. The British Ministry of Magic has particular— they call it the creature clause— for cases involving non-human magical beings or their descendants." "I am a student," Fleur said. "Not a creature." "Yes," Apollon said. "I know." Fleur picked up the Beauxbatons letter and looked at it for a long moment. Then she set it back down, opened the writing desk, and took out a clean sheet of parchment. "I will need the formal address for the Hogwarts Board of Governors," she said. Apollon looked at her daughter for a moment with that complicated parental expression, grief and joy and something like awe, and then went to find the address. Harry found out about the Hogwarts letters from Hermione, who wrote in mid-July in a state of controlled excitement that was, by his estimation, the most excited he'd seen her. The letter came today. By owl, to my parents' house, in a proper envelope with the Hogwarts crest. It's real, Harry. It says I have a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry starting September 1st. There's a supply list. It wants me to buy a cauldron, pewter, standard size 2, 5 sets of plain work robes, a wand, several textbooks. I've already written to a bookshop in a place called Diagon Alley. I found the address in one of my books. The letter went on for 4 pages. It ended, "When does yours come? And how do we find each other before September?" Harry's letter arrived 3 days later. Not by owl, by a large tawny that landed directly on his windowsill at 9 in the morning while the Dursleys were at breakfast, and Harry crossed the room in 3 steps, opened the window, took the letter, and read it standing up. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. September 1st. Platform 9 3/4, King's Cross Station. He read the supply list twice. He had no money, no access to Diagon Alley, no idea how any of this worked practically. He went downstairs with the letter. Uncle Vernon was at the table with his newspaper. Aunt Petunia was making tea. Dudley was eating toast with the focused application of someone who treats food as a personal project. Harry put the Hogwarts letter on the table in front of his uncle. Vernon Dursley looked at it. His face went, in sequence, pink and then red and then a particular shade that Harry had always privately thought of as dangerous purple. "No," he said. "It's not a question," Harry said. "I said no, I know what you said." Harry kept his voice even. He'd spent 10 years learning to read the Dursleys, learning what would escalate things and what would diffuse them, and he had always, until this moment, used that knowledge to make himself smaller. "I'm going. I need access to money. I've found out there's a vault at Gringotts Bank in London with my parents' name on it. I need someone to take me to London." The silence was significant. Petunia made a sound high, almost involuntary, and looked away from the letter. "You knew," Harry said, understanding it in the same moment he said it. He looked at his aunt. "You knew about all of this." She didn't answer. Her hands on the teacup were very still. "There's a letter," Vernon said, recovering his voice. "There was always a letter from Dumbledore, when we took you in. Where is it?" Another silence. "Where is it?" Harry said again, the same tone, no louder. Petunia set down her teacup. She left the kitchen. She came back 3 minutes later with an envelope that had clearly been opened and resealed multiple times, the flap faintly worn. She set it on the table and then stood back, looking at a point somewhere above Harry's head. He picked it up. "Read it." It was from Albus Dumbledore, and it was brief, warmer than he expected, more human, and it confirmed everything he'd already worked out about his parents, about why he was at Privet Drive, about the protection in his mother's blood that tethered him to the house. It also mentioned Gringotts, and said that arrangements had been made, that the vault was accessible with the key that was, Dumbledore noted, being kept by one Rubeus Hagrid until Harry came of age or required it sooner. "I need this key," Harry said. "We don't have it," Vernon said. Which was probably true. Dumbledore had clearly been careful about that. Harry folded both letters, Dumbledore's and his own, and put them in his pocket. Then he looked at his uncle. "I need you to take me to London," he said. "Or arrange a way for me to get there. I'm going to Diagon Alley. I'm going to get my school supplies. And on September 1st, I'm going to King's Cross." Vernon's face did the purple thing again. "I'm not asking," Harry said simply. Not threateningly. Just clearly. Something shifted in the kitchen. Harry couldn't have explained it precisely. It was the same sensation as the market, that pulse, but smaller, internal. A warmth in his chest that moved outward. The overhead light steadied, brightened slightly, and the shadows in the room became a fraction too well defined. Vernon Dursley looked at the light on the ceiling and then back at Harry and made a decision with the pragmatic cowardice of someone who has just properly understood that the child in his kitchen is not the same proposition he has been managing for 10 years. "We'll go Saturday," he said from behind his newspaper. Harry nodded. "Thank you," he said, because he'd learned that gratitude, even where it wasn't quite genuine, kept things from escalating unnecessarily. He went upstairs, pulled out paper, and wrote to both Fleur and Hermione, "I'm going to Diagon Alley on Saturday. If either of you can be there, be there." Hermione's response came in a day. "We were already planning to go Saturday. My mother has a list. Meet us at Gringotts at 11. Fleur's came the next morning. "I have convinced Maman. We arrive in London on Friday. I will be at Gringotts at 11. I have news." She didn't say what the news was. Harry was beginning to understand this was deliberate. Fleur shared information at the pace that suited her, not the pace that satisfied curiosity, and arguing with it was roughly as productive as arguing with the weather. Saturday arrived the way important days tend to, too quickly and already half gone by the time you're properly in them. Vernon dropped Harry at the entrance to a pub called the Leaky Cauldron with the energy of a man completing a task he wants behind him, and Harry pushed open the door and stepped into his first experience of the magical world in England. The Leaky Cauldron was dim and busy and smelled of a century of spilled drinks and complicated history. The barman, a toothless man who introduced himself as Tom before Harry had asked, shook Harry's hand for a long time and looked at the scar and said "Bless my soul" several times. Harry gently reclaimed his hand and asked for directions to Gringotts. "Through the back," Tom said. "Through the brick wall. Tap it 3 times. Harry tapped it, watched the wall fold back, and stepped into Diagon Alley. He stopped walking for about 30 seconds. That was all he allowed himself. The alley was full of magic, actual magic, visible and unapologetic, woven into everything. Broomsticks hanging in a shop front window. A cart selling potions that changed color in the sunlight. Robes in every shade in a boutique with a mannequin that adjusted its own posture. An owl emporium with 3 floors of birds and the sound to match. The smell of the place, old stone and fresh bread from a bakery he couldn't locate, and something sharp and clean that he would later identify as essence of magical parchment. He walked through it to Gringotts. The bank was white marble and enormous and staffed by creatures he recognized from Hermione's letters, goblins, small and sharp-featured and utterly unimpressed by anything about him. He stated his name to the first available teller, who performed a series of checks with an efficiency that brooked no charm offensive, and then a different goblin produced, from somewhere Harry couldn't identify, a small gold key. "Vault 687, the goblin said. "Cart departs in 5 minutes. I'm meeting people first," Harry said. "Can I have 10 minutes? The goblin looked at him with the particular expression of someone to whom time is a finite resource and other people's social plans are not its problem. 7 minutes, it said. Harry was outside the bank in 2. He spotted Hermione first, brown hair, striped shirt, a different one but same energy, standing with a couple who were clearly her parents by virtue of the same upright posture and the same particular quality of paying close attention to everything. She was already scanning the street. She spotted him at the same moment. Her face did the thing where it tried not to show relief and mostly succeeded. "Harry." She crossed to him, and they did the slightly formal handshake again, which was already becoming their thing. Did you do something? You seem different." "Then what?" "Then the market. You seem more," she considered. "Settled. Intentional." "Something happened with my uncle," he said. "I'll tell you later." Hermione's parents arrived, David and Jean Granger, who shook Harry's hand with the practical warmth of people who have decided to be good at this magical world business regardless of their feelings about it. Jean asked about his trip to London. David asked, with genuine curiosity, whether Gringotts was as impressive inside as the facade suggested. Harry was in the middle of answering when Fleur came through the bank's marble doors. She'd arrived first, he registered this. She'd been inside already, probably, doing whatever needed doing, the news she'd mentioned organized and ready. She was in white today, her silver hair catching every scrap of light the alley had to offer, and she moved through the crowd the way people move when they've learned to treat attention as ambient rather than significant. The crowd noticed her and rearranged subtly, the way people do around Veela without knowing why, and she walked through it without acknowledging it. Behind her, Apollon. And behind Apollon, unexpected, a tall woman with an air of administrative authority, and what Harry could only describe as deliberate neutrality, was someone Harry didn't know yet but would come to understand as significant. Fleur reached Harry and Hermione and there was a moment, all 3 of them, that was slightly outside normal time. A recalibration. Like instruments returning to the same pitch. "You look well," Fleur said to Harry. "You look like you've been planning something," Harry said. The edge of her mouth moved. "Always." She turned. "This is Madame Beaumont. She is a ministry liaison, French ministry. She has come because my transfer application required, there were complications." "What kind of complications?" Hermione said immediately. Madame Beaumont stepped forward. She was probably 40, dark-haired, with the air of someone who has read every rule and memorized the relevant subclauses. Miss Delacour's application to transfer to Hogwarts was submitted through the standard educational channels, she said, in excellent English. It was processed and conditionally approved by the Hogwarts Board of Governors. However, because Miss Delacour is 1/4 Veela, the British Ministry of Magic has requested that the enrollment be flagged under the creature clause of the 1847 Magical Beings Act. A pause during which all three children looked at Madame Beaumont with varying expressions. They want to register me, Fleur said. As a magical creature. At a school. Where I will be a student. That's absurd, Hermione said flatly. Yes, Madame Beaumont agreed, with the carefully measured tone of someone who agrees but is employed to be diplomatic about it. The French ministry's position is that this application of the clause to a student of mixed human heritage is an overreach. We are contesting it. Good, Harry said. He was looking at Fleur. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Fleur said, my transfer is conditionally approved. I begin Hogwarts in September. In first year. She said this last part with the slight effort of someone who has made peace with something mildly insulting. She would have been in second year at Beaux Batons, having already completed a foundational year. It is fine, she said, reading Harry's expression. I would rather be a year behind in the same school than a year ahead in the wrong one. You've thought about this, he said. I have thought about nothing else since Lion, she said simply. And then, because she had decided somewhere in the writing of 40-something letters that honesty was the only useful currency between the three of them. The bond matters to me. You matter to me. Both of you. I did not want to be in France wondering how you were. Hermione made a sound that was not quite words. What? Fleur looked at her. Nothing, Hermione said. I've wanted to say that to someone my whole life and I keep finding the words are. She stopped. Started over. I'm glad you're coming. Yes, Fleur said. Me too. They went into Gringotts together. The cart down to Harry's vault was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, and Hermione narrated the goblin-made architecture of the tunnels with the focused joy of someone who has waited their whole life to be in exactly this situation. And Fleur gripped the edge of the cart and looked entirely composed until a particularly sharp turn nearly threw Harry against the wall, and she grabbed his arm without thinking and then released it and looked elsewhere very deliberately, and Harry thought, she doesn't like admitting when something surprises her. He filed it away. The vault was full of gold. More gold than Harry had ever thought about owning, because the concept of owning anything had been fairly abstract until recently. He stood in front of it for a moment, and then took what he thought was a reasonable amount, and closed the vault, and didn't look back. They spent the rest of the morning in Diagon Alley. Madame Malkin's for robes. Fleur required different robes than the Hogwarts standard and negotiated this with the seamstress in a combination of French and very precise English that resulted in robes that were technically compliant, and also considerably more elegant than anyone else's would be. Hermione bought every book on the list, and then 3 more. Harry bought his books, his potion supplies, his cauldron, and an eagle owl he named Aries because the owl looked like it had opinions, and Harry felt that naming something powerful after something powerful was honest. The wand shop was last. Ollivander's, small, dusty, filled with the peculiar silence of things waiting. Ollivander measured all 3 of them, and then moved through his shelves with the specific focused energy of someone performing a service they've spent a lifetime perfecting. Harry went through 11 wands before the 12th. Holly and Phoenix Feather, 11 inches, chose him, and the warmth that swept the shop when he gave it a wave was familiar, the same warmth as the market, as the letters, as the moment he'd looked at Fleur across the cafe table and understood something. Ollivander looked at Harry over his tape measure with silver eyes that missed nothing. Curious, he said very quietly. The phoenix whose tail feather is in your wand gave another feather. Just one other. It is in the wand of the one whose magic made you. He stopped himself. Curious, he said again, and moved on to Hermione. Hermione's wand, vine wood and dragon heartstring, 10 3/4 inches, sparked immediately on the first try, as though it had been waiting and was slightly annoyed at the delay. Fleur's was the longest process. She went through 30 wands, more than Harry had, and Ollivander grew quieter and more focused with each attempt, his expression shifting from professional interest to something closer to genuine fascination. The 31st wand was rosewood and Veela hair, 9.5 inches, and when Fleur took it, the shop filled with silver light, not the ambient silver of her magic but something focused, directional, purposeful. Ollivander exhaled. "I have never sold that wand," he said, in a tone that suggested he'd been waiting to. Outside, the three of them stood in the alley with their wands in their pockets, and the sun going gold in the early afternoon. "September 1st, Hermione said. "September 1st, Harry agreed. Fleur looked between them. The news she'd been carrying all day, the ministry complication, the transfer, the creature clause, sat behind her eyes with a weight she wasn't hiding now. "There will be difficulty," she said. "At Hogwarts. With the British ministry. I think it will not stop with the clause." "No," Harry said. "Probably not. And you are not worried." "I didn't say that," Harry said. "I said probably not." "There's a difference," Hermione said, "between worried and afraid. Worried means you're thinking about it. Afraid means it stops you." She looked at Fleur. "We're not stopping." Fleur considered this. Then she nodded once, with the decisive quality that was entirely her own. "Good," she said. "I am not built for stopping." None of them were. That was, perhaps, the point. The Grangers took them all to lunch at a cafe that blessedly required no magical navigation, and Apollon and Jean Granger talked for an hour about educational systems and parental concerns and the specific complications of raising a child who operates on a frequency the world isn't quite calibrated for. Harry sat beside Hermione and across from Fleur and ate a sandwich and felt, again, that sensation of things being correctly arranged. On the train back, the Grangers had offered him a ride to Surrey, which he'd accepted. Hermione fell asleep against the window and Fleur's last letter of the day, she'd handed it to him at the station, pre-written, which was such a Fleur thing that he'd almost laughed, sat in his jacket pocket. He read it on the train while Hermione slept beside him. "Harry, I have been thinking about what you said, that you are afraid of becoming someone who needs saving. I want to say something about this. There is a difference between needing saving and allowing yourself to be saved. The first is weakness. The second is wisdom. You have spent 10 years doing everything alone because there was no one to do it with you. That is not going to be true anymore. I am not saying this to be kind. I am saying it because the bond does not choose weak souls and it did not choose you by accident. Whatever is coming, and I think something is coming, I can feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives. We will face it in the right direction. 3 instruments, yes? Same frequency. Fleur P.S. Hermione will probably be asleep on something by the time you read this. She does not sleep enough during the day. Make sure she eats." Harry looked at Hermione asleep against the train window. She was holding her new books against her chest like armor or like something precious. Her lips were moving very slightly, which he would later learn meant she was working through something in her sleep. Hermione's brain, it turned out, didn't really switch off so much as it changed operational modes. He folded Fleur's letter carefully and put it in his inside pocket close. Outside, England moved past in summer green, and September was coming, and something was coming with it. He could feel it too, the way you feel weather before it arrives, and Harry Potter, 10 years old, sat on a train between worlds and did not look away from what was coming. He watched for it instead. Already making notes. Chapter 3, First Blood. The Hogwarts Express left at 11. Harry was on the platform at 10:15, which meant he had 45 minutes of standing on platform 9 3/4 watching the wizarding world arrange itself around a large red train. He'd come through the barrier alone. The Dursleys had dropped him at King's Cross with the particular relief of people completing a contractual obligation, and he stood with his trolley and Aries in his cage and watched. The platform was its own ecosystem. Families clustered around trunks, parents in robes that ranged from practical to extraordinary, children in varying states of excitement and terror. Owls complained. A cat sat on someone's trolley with the dignity of elected royalty. 2 red-headed twins were conducting what appeared to be a product demonstration for a group of second years, producing things from their pockets with the showmanship of seasoned performers. An older prefect moved through the crowd with a badge and an expression that suggested he found both the badge and the crowd slightly beneath him. Harry watched all of it, and catalogued it with the habit of someone who has learned that understanding your environment is the first step to navigating it safely. He found the compartment Hermione had old about, 3rd carriage, 2nd compartment. She'd asked a 7th-year prefect in an all the week before and had received, somewhat to the prefect's own surprise, a direct answer. He loaded his trunk, settled Aries, and sat. Hermione arrived at 10:31. He knew because she was carrying a watch she checked as she came through the compartment door. "I meant to be here at 10:25, she said, slightly breathless. "But Dad misread the sign and we went to the wrong platform first." "You're still early," Harry said. "I know. It's still irritating." She sat across from him, pulled a book from her bag before her trunk was properly stowed, and then seemed to decide that was poor prioritization and stood to sort the trunk first. "Fleur's parents owed last night. She'll be here by 10:45. "I know. She owed me too." Hermione looked at him over her trunk. "She sent you a separate owl from the one she sent me?" "Yes." A pause during which Hermione clearly decided whether this was worth analyzing. She decided against it, visibly, and went back to her trunk. "We need to talk about the sorting," she said. "We do?" "Yes. The houses, you know about the houses?" "I've read extensively. Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin. The sorting process is apparently a hat. Ascension hat. Which is..." She paused. "Fine. Magical. Anyway, the point is, we need to be in the same house. Obviously. Can we arrange that?" "I don't know. I've found nothing about whether you can influence it or whether it's purely diagnostic." She finally got the trunk sorted and sat back down with her book. "I've been thinking about what house the 3 of us would logically be in based on our demonstrated traits, and Gryffindor," Harry said. Hermione looked up. "Fleur's the bravest person I've met," Harry said. "She transferred countries at 11 years old because she decided it was right. You walked into a magical marketplace in Lyon without knowing what it was because you were curious enough to follow the light. And He thought about standing in the Dursleys' kitchen with the letter and the overhead light brightening without him asking it to. I think I've been in Gryffindor my whole life. I just didn't know the word for it." Hermione stared at him for a moment. "You're occasionally very annoying," she said. "Why?" "Because you sometimes make an argument that I've been building toward for 20 minutes, and you make it in 3 sentences and you're right." She looked back at her book. "Gryffindor," she agreed. Fleur arrived at 10:43. She came into the compartment with her trunk in a small carry case and sat beside Harry with the efficiency of someone who has already decided where they're sitting, which left Hermione across from both of them, which seemed to suit Hermione fine as it gave her a better angle for observing things. "The platform is very loud," Fleur said. "Yes," Harry agreed. "Several people stared at me." "Also yes." One boy, very blond, walking with 2 others who appeared to be furniture, looked at me like he was assessing livestock. I looked back at him until he stopped. She opened her carry case and produced a book. "His name will matter later. Things like him always turn out to matter." "Draco Malfoy," Harry said. Fleur and Hermione both looked at him. "He introduced himself on the platform. Or tried to. He said his name, shook my hand, and started explaining how things work at Hogwarts. I let him finish." Harry paused. "He's not stupid. He's just been told that his particular kind of intelligence is the only kind that counts." "Who told you that?" Hermione said. "He did. In the way people tell you things without knowing they're doing it." Harry looked out the window. He's also the son of Lucius Malfoy. Another pause. Who is? Hermione said. On the board of governors that approved Fleur's transfer, Harry said. Lucius Malfoy signed the conditional approval. His signature was on the paperwork Madame Beaumont showed your mother. Fleur had gone very still in the way she went still when she was thinking hard. You noticed his name on ministry paperwork, she said. I noticed things, Harry said simply. The train lurched and began to move, and the platform slid past the windows, families waving, the twins performing some kind of elaborate farewell that their mother was clearly both exhausted by and fond of, and then the station was gone, and England opened out around them in the easy sprawl of late summer. They talked for most of the journey. Other students came and went. A round-faced boy named Neville who lost his toad and was reassured by Hermione with genuine warmth. Another girl with pale eyes and a magazine held upside down who looked at all three of them with an expression of serene interest and said, "You're the Bond trio, aren't you?" and then drifted away again before any of them could ask how she knew. Harry caught a flash of silver hair through the compartment door window 3 times at intervals. Draco Malfoy walking the train, he thought, making assessments. By the time the train was 2 hours out, Hermione had put her book away and was thinking out loud about the creature clause. Fleur was teaching Harry the correct pronunciation of several French counterjinxes, and all three of them had eaten through most of the trolley's supplies with the appetite of people who'd been running on nervous energy since morning. Tell me something, Fleur said, somewhere in the 3rd hour, looking at Harry. Your uncle. You said something happened with him. Harry told them about the kitchen. The letter, the purple face, the light that had changed. He told it plainly. Fleur listened with the focused quality that was hers. Hermione had stopped pretending to look at anything else. You did wandless magic, Hermione said when he finished. At 10. Deliberately. I'm not sure it was deliberate, Harry said. It had intent, she said. That's close enough. The ambient light changing in response to emotional state is one thing, that's the standard accidental magic signature. But you described it as having a direction. The shadows sharpening. That's not ambient. That's... She was already pulling a book out, the reflexive motion of someone who thinks in texts. There are references in magical theory, 7th year level, to intentional ambient magic being a marker of, can we call it useful and move on? Harry said. I can call it useful and also be extremely interested in the mechanism, Hermione said, finding her page. That's fair. Harry agreed. Fleur had been quiet through this. Now she said, your uncle. He will not make trouble now. No, Harry said. You're certain. I'm certain. He said it with the flat confidence of someone who has done a risk assessment and is comfortable with the result. He's the kind of man who respects force. I showed him I could exert it. That's sufficient. Fleur studied him for a moment. Most people at your age are afraid of their relatives? I was going to say more uncertain, she said. About their own strength. Harry thought about this honestly. I've known since I was about 6 that I was different. That things listened to me when I was angry or scared. The hard part wasn't knowing that. The hard part was knowing when to use it. He looked out the window. I've been waiting to have a good reason. I think September 1st qualifies. The castle appeared out of the darkness just after the boats crossed the lake, rising from the rock with the particular grandeur of something built to be seen and to endure. Harry looked up at it from the boat he was sharing with Hermione, Fleur, and Neville, who had found them again in the confusion of the platform and attached himself with the grateful relief of someone who recognized safe people, and felt the castle notice him in return. That was the only way he could describe it. A recognition, like the market in Lyon but older, Stonedoran more complicated. He felt Fleur go still beside him, she'd felt it too. It knows us, she said quietly. Buildings don't know things, Hermione said, and then, do they? This one does, Harry said. Hagrid's lantern swung ahead of them in the dark, and the boats moved silently across the black water, and the castle waited. The sorting was, as described, a hat. It sat on a stool at the front of the great hall and sang a song about houses that Harry thought was impressive from a structural standpoint, while the first-year students stood in a line and tried to look calm. The hall was everything the books had suggested, enchanted ceiling currently showing a black Scottish sky with enough stars to be philosophical about, for long tables, hundreds of candles, and approximately 400 existing students evaluating the new arrivals with the particular energy of people who know something you don't yet. Harry stood in the line between Hermione and Fleur and watched the sorting begin alphabetically, which meant they had a while. Hannah Abbott went to Hufflepuff with a beaming relief. Susan Bones followed. The students called to the stool went up, placed the hat, waited, some longer than others, and then the hat shouted a house and the relevant table applauded. Granger, Hermione! Hermione walked to the stool with the posture of someone who has decided the best response to being watched is to give them something worth watching. She sat. The hat went on. There was a pause, longer than most, the hat shifting slightly on her head as though having a conversation, and then, Gryffindor! The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry felt something ease in his chest. Hermione came to stand at the side. There was a system where sorted students stood together until the sorting was complete, and her expression, when she found Harry in the line, was controlled satisfaction and nothing else. Several more students. Draco Malfoy sat for approximately half a second before the hat called Slytherin, which Harry thought was probably a very short conversation. The blonde boy went to the green table with the air of someone walking to a pre-booked table at a restaurant he co-owns. Delacour, Fleur. The great hall changed when Fleur walked to the stool. Harry felt it, not the Veela charm, which Fleur kept controlled and internal the way Apollon had taught her, but the simple fact of her presence, which was its own force of nature. She walked like the hall was a space she'd agreed to occupy rather than a space that owned her. She sat. The hat went on. The pause was the longest yet. Harry watched the hat. The hat's brim twitched. Fleur sat utterly still with her hands in her lap and her chin level, and he could see the slight tension in her jaw that meant she was having a real conversation in there. Gryffindor! The Gryffindor table applauded, but half the hall was still looking at her, and Harry could see from the staff table that several professors had straightened in their chairs. He catalogued the faces, a man with a turban, watching with nervy interest. A woman with a severe bun and a look of measured assessment, McGonagall, he thought. An old man at the center with half-moon glasses and a silver beard and eyes that were very, very awake. Dumbledore looked at Fleur and then, as though he'd felt Harry's attention, looked at Harry, and for a moment the old man's expression was simply, ah. Not surprised. Never that. Just ah. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet in a way it hadn't for anyone else. Not the polite attentive quiet of the other sortings, but the particular silence of a room full of people trying very hard not to react to something. Harry walked to the stool. He didn't look at the staff table, and he didn't look at the students, and he didn't perform anything for anyone. He sat, put the hat on, and waited. The hat's voice in his head was surprising, dry and very old, and not unkind. Well, well. 3 in a row from the same bond. The castle is paying attention, I can tell you that much. What can you tell me? Harry thought back. More than you know. Less than you'll need. A pause. You could be great in Slytherin, you know. The ambition is there. The strategic mind. I know, Harry thought. But Hermione and Fleur are in Gryffindor. Would you really choose based on that? Yes. Not because you're afraid of Slytherin? No. A longer pause. Something in the hat seemed to recalibrate. No, it agreed. I see that. You're not afraid of much at all, are you, boy? Curious thing. Another shift. Very well. It had better be. Gryffindor! The table erupted. Louder than Hermione, louder than Fleur, the accumulated noise of 400 people releasing held breath. Harry took the hat off, set it on the stool, and walked to join Fleur and Hermione without looking at the hall. He got there. Hermione grabbed his arm briefly, not a hug, a grip, quick and strong. Fleur said nothing, but the expression she turned on him when he arrived was one of the things he'd been storing in the loose floorboard part of his mind since Lion. Unguarded, warm, briefly young. "Obviously," she said. "Obviously," he agreed. They sat at the Gryffindor table together, and the feast appeared, and everything was briefly, genuinely wonderful. The problem arrived in the form of Marcus Flint on the second morning. Harry had been expecting something. He'd been in enough situations to know that new environments had their own predator and prey dynamics, and that something about the three of them, the bond, the arrival, the particular way they moved through the castle without performing any of the expected first-year vulnerability, would draw attention from the kind of person who read confidence as a challenge. Flint was a sixth-year, a Slytherin, and Quidditch captain, and he was large in the way people are large when they've been large since 14 and have organized their personality around it. He moved through corridors like he expected them to expand for him. He was not, Harry assessed after 48 hours of observation, especially clever, but he had a social intelligence that more conventionally smart people often underestimated. He knew exactly how much he could do in plain sight before it became an official problem. He caught them in a corridor on the second morning, coming back from breakfast. The corridor was not empty, for other students, 2 first years, 2 second years, but it was empty enough. Flint was with 2 others, both Slytherin, both large. The target was Hermione. "Mudblood first years," Flint said, to the corridor at large rather than to anyone specifically, with the practiced casualness of someone who has found the precise volume that carries without being reportable. "The hat's standards are really dropping." Harry had heard the word before. Not that word specifically, but the architecture of it, the kind of word that's chosen not for accuracy but for damage. He registered it, and registered Hermione registering it, the slight intake of breath, the reflexive drawing inward that people do when something lands. He stepped around Hermione and looked at Flint. Not up at Flint, he was shorter, he was 11, the geometry didn't favor him. But he looked at him in a way that had very little to do with height. "Say that again," Harry said, conversationally. Flint looked down at him with the amused contempt of someone who finds the situation entertainingly disproportionate. "Or what, Potter? Your dad's dead." Or I'll remember it," Harry said. "And I have a very good memory." Flint laughed. It was a real laugh. He wasn't performing for anyone. He genuinely found this funny. "A first year with a good memory. I'm terrified." "You should be," said Fleur. She was to Harry's left, which meant Flint hadn't quite tracked her in the geometry of the standoff, and now he did, and the laugh became something less certain. Fleur had not raised her voice and she had not done anything with her Veela magic. The silver warmth was completely contained, professional, but she was looking at Flint with the particular quality she had of making you feel observed at a level below the social. "You are Marcus Flint," she said. "Your Quidditch tactics this year will be reviewed by the new Professor Dumbledore is bringing in for defense. I heard this at breakfast. You were 2 tables away and speaking at volume. Your position on the team depends entirely on results this season." A pause. "I notice things," she said. "About everyone." Another pause. "You should think about whether you want to be a thing I keep noticing." Flint stared at her. "Also," Hermione said from behind Harry, her voice entirely steady, the initial flinch was gone, replaced with something harder and more focused. "The word you used has a legal dimension in the current ministry framework. Specifically, the 1968 amendment to the improper use of magic statutes covers verbal harassment of Muggle-born students on school grounds. I've read the relevant section. It doesn't require a wand. It requires intent and witness." She looked at the 2 second years watching from the corridor's end. "Hello?" she said pleasantly. Flint looked at the second years. Looked at Harry. Looked at Fleur. Looked at Hermione. Whatever calculation he'd been running when he'd opened the conversation reached a different conclusion than the one he'd started toward. He did the thing that people with social intelligence do when they miscalculate. He didn't retreat exactly, but he redirected, adjusting the angle so it didn't look like retreat. "First years," he said, shaking his head with theatrical dismissal. He walked away. The two Slytherins followed. The corridor settled. The second years drifted. Harry turned to Hermione. "Are you okay?" "Yes," she said. Immediately, flatly. "Hermione," she exhaled. "I'd read about the word. I knew it existed. Knowing about something and having it said at you are." She stopped. Pressed her lips together. "I'm fine. I'm angry, which is different from hurt, which is the useful one." "Both are useful," Fleur said. Hermione looked at her. "Hurt tells you where you are vulnerable," Fleur said. "Anger tells you what to do about it." She looked down the corridor where Flint had gone. "He will not use that word again. Not near us." "Because of the legal thing?" Harry asked. "Because of the legal thing and because I was not making an idle suggestion about what I notice." Fleur straightened her bag on her shoulder. "I meant what I said. I pay attention. And people who pay close, sustained attention to someone's weak points are significantly more dangerous than someone who simply hexes them in a corridor." Harry watched her. "You've been managing situations like this your whole life," he said. "My whole life," she confirmed, without drama. "Teach me," Hermione said. Fleur looked at her, a genuine look, assessing and warm. "I already am," she said. By the end of the first week, they had established a rhythm. Classes were, for Harry, the first experience of learning that had ever been designed to include him. He was not a natural at sitting still, and he was not a natural at taking notes in the structured way Hermione did. Her notes had sections and she cross-referenced them, which Harry thought was either very impressive or a cry for help or probably both. But he was a natural at understanding what information was useful and why. Defense against the dark arts was the obvious one. The theory made immediate sense to him. The practical demonstrations in week 2 put him ahead of every other first year, including a third year who'd wandered in for extra help and left looking thoughtful. Charms he was good at. Precision, Flitwick explained, was as much about intent as about wand movement, and Harry's intent was very clear. Transfiguration, McGonagall's domain, required a patience he was developing. Potions was Snape. Harry had been warned. Hermione had put together a comprehensive picture from talking to older students, but the reality of Snape was still a specific experience. The man moved through his dungeon classroom with the energy of someone conducting a personal audit of everyone present and finding the results disappointing. He questioned students with the specific technique of asking things they couldn't be expected to know yet in order to establish a hierarchy of his own design. "Potter," Snape said during the first class, his voice carrying the particular weight of someone who has been preparing for this specific encounter. "Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" A sleeping potion, Harry thought. A strong one. He'd read ahead. Hermione had insisted, and she'd been right, and he was grateful. "Draught of living death," Harry said. "It's one of the most powerful sleeping draughts known. The combination creates a depressant effect on magical synapses that's proportionally deeper than either ingredient produces alone." Silence in the dungeon. Snape looked at him with an expression that was attempting neutrality, and not quite achieving it. "Where the bezoar is found," he said, pivoting without acknowledging the answer. "Stomach of a goat. It's an antidote to most poisons, which makes it practically useful to know the source. Monkshood and wolfsbane. Same plant. Different names. Also called aconite. Useful in polyjuice potion and Wiggenweld, though it's poisonous in undiluted form and the processing method matters significantly." Snape looked at Harry for a long moment. Then he said, 5 points from Gryffindor." The class went very quiet. 4? Harry said. "For answering without being given permission to. You asked me questions," Harry said. "I answered them. That's the conventional structure of a question." From beside Harry, he heard Hermione make the small sound she made when she was very impressed and trying not to show it. From across the room, from the Slytherin side, he heard a snort that was quickly suppressed. Snape's eyes narrowed. Whatever he was looking at when he looked at Harry, Harry knew, from letters and from Apollon and from the way Ollivander had looked at him, that adults often saw something in his face that they'd expected to see in someone else, was complicated. There was dislike, yes. But there was also something Harry thought might be discomfort, which was different and more interesting. 5 points from Gryffindor for insolence, Snape said and moved on. Harry wrote it down, not the point loss, but Snape's specific methodology. Understanding a system required understanding its architects. He'd think about Snape properly later. Fleur watched this from across the room with the expression of someone making accurate predictions. She told him, on the train, "There will be a teacher who decides you are a statement about your father." Harry had not asked how she knew. She just did. It was the Thursday of the first week when the letter arrived. Not a letter from anyone he knew, an official letter, ministry seal, delivered by a ministry owl directly to Professor McGonagall, who called Harry, Hermione, and Fleur out of Transfiguration on Friday morning with an expression she was controlling very carefully. Her office was small and exact, like its occupant. She sat behind her desk and looked at the three of them for a moment before she spoke. "I received correspondence yesterday from the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures," she said. "Specifically from a senior undersecretary in that department." She paused on this. "The correspondence relates to Miss Delacour's enrollment and to the bond between the three of you." "Umbridge," Fleur said. McGonagall looked at her sharply. "You know this name. Madame Beaumont mentioned it. She said a senior undersecretary had been pushing to apply the creature clause to my enrollment." "Undersecretary Umbridge." Fleur said it with precise diction, the way you say someone's name when you want to make clear it isn't going to frighten you. "The letter requests," McGonagall said carefully, "that the school provide documentation of the Veela bond under Section 12 of the creature clause, including, and I am quoting directly, detailed assessment of the bond's influence on the affected human students to ensure their autonomous agency is not compromised." "She wants to know if we're being controlled," Hermione said. "That is the implication," McGonagall said. "We're not," Harry said. "I know that," McGonagall said. And something in her expression shifted, the controlled professionalism cracking slightly to show the woman inside it, who was angry. "I want you to know that I have no intention of complying with this request as framed. The creature clause was not designed to apply to students, and I believe its application here is legally weak. However," she straightened, "I cannot promise this will be the end of it. The Undersecretary has significant ministry influence. I wanted you to be informed." Harry looked at McGonagall. He thought about what Fleur had said on the train, about paying attention to people, about understanding them. McGonagall was a woman who respected competence and directness. She was not comfortable with what she'd been asked to do, and she was telling them so, which was more honesty than most adults offered children. "Thank you for telling us directly," Harry said. McGonagall looked at him for a moment. 5 points to Gryffindor," she said. "For each of you." 4. She paused. "Starting well." They filed out into the corridor. The castle moved around them in its morning rhythm, the distant sound of classes, the occasional burst of something that might have been Peeves, the muffled argument from the direction of the Charms corridor. "Umbridge is going to be a problem," Hermione said. "Yes," Harry said. "We need to know more about her. Specifically about the legal limits of the creature clause and whether Section 12 can be applied to students without parental consent." She was already thinking ahead, the way she did, building the structure of the problem before committing to a solution. "I'm going to the library." "Obviously," Fleur said. "You should come," Hermione told her. "You know the French version of this legislation and there might be comparable language." "I know," Fleur said. "I said obviously." Hermione blinked. Then she smiled, quick and genuine. "Right. Sorry." "Don't apologize," Fleur said, firmly and warmly. "You are always right about the library." They went. Harry went with them, because where they went, he went. And also because he had his own questions and his own reasons and a very good memory that was already working on Lucius Malfoy's name on a piece of ministry paperwork and Draco Malfoy in a corridor, and Snape's complicated reaction to his face, and the way Dumbledore had looked at him at the sorting with the expression of someone who'd been expecting him and was thinking several moves ahead. He was thinking several moves ahead too. The library was warm and large and smelled of the particular combination of old parchment and cleaning charms that became, over the coming years, one of the smells Harry associated with safety. Madame Pants watched them from behind her desk with the focused neutrality of someone who respects serious use of her collection. Hermione went to the index with the confidence of someone whose natural habitat is a catalog system. Fleur went to the international law section, which apparently existed, with the directness of someone who has known where things are kept since before she arrived. Harry sat at a table, pulled out his notebook, and started writing down everything he knew about everyone who had a stake in what was happening. It was a long list for the end of the first week. It was also, he thought, the right kind of list to have. Not the list of someone who was worried and couldn't act. The list of someone who was paying attention and building towards something. Outside the library's high windows, the grounds were September gold, and the castle was talking to itself in the subsonic frequency that old magic makes when it's working, and Harry Potter sat in the Hogwarts library on the 5th day of his magical education and planned for things that hadn't happened yet with two of the most remarkable people he'd ever met. The first week ended. They had 5 points each. They had Umbridge's name on a piece of paper. They had each other. Harry thought, more than enough. Chapter 4. The Compact. The chamber found Fleur on a Wednesday in October. She'd been walking the dungeon's corridor alone. Harry was at a late charm session Flitwick had invited him to after he'd performed a particularly complex Wingardium on a stack of 7 objects simultaneously. And Hermione was in the library working through an annotated copy of the 1847 Magical Beings Act that she'd found wedged behind a shelf of Goblin Rebellion texts, as though someone had wanted it not to be found. Fleur had been heading back from dinner, taking the longer route because she liked the lower corridors. The way the castle's magic moved differently below ground, denser and older, like the difference between surface water and deep water. She noticed the wall because it was warm. Not heated, not the warmth of a fire or a charm. Something older than that. She stopped walking and put her hand flat against the stone and felt the warmth pulse once, steady and deliberate, like a second heartbeat. She pressed. The wall didn't open dramatically. It sort of exhaled, a slow release of air that had been held for a very long time, and then the stones rearranged themselves in the unhurried way of things that have been waiting and are not in a hurry now that the waiting is over. Behind them, stairs going down, lit by a faint silver-gold light that had no visible source. Fleur stood at the top of the stairs and thought about this for roughly 4 seconds. Then she went down. The chamber at the bottom was not large. That was the first thing that surprised her. She'd expected something cathedral, something dramatic, the scale of Hogwarts translated into underground architecture. Instead, it was the size of a comfortable sitting room, circular, with a low domed ceiling and walls that were covered in carvings so fine and so dense that from a distance they looked like texture rather than imagery. The floor was smooth stone that had been polished by use rather than by magic, the kind of smoothness that takes centuries of footsteps. At the center of the room was a shallow circular basin built into the floor, perhaps 2 feet across, filled with what looked like water but moved the way water doesn't move, in patterns, slowly, with intention. Fleur walked to the basin and looked into it. It showed her Harry and Hermione. Not as visions, exactly, more like reflections, the way you'd see something in a mirror from the side rather than directly. Harry was in Flitwick's classroom, and she could see from the way he was holding his wand that he was being asked to demonstrate something. And there was the quality he had when he was in motion, this focused ease, like the magic was a language he'd always spoken. Hermione was in the library, and the basin showed her with 3 books opened simultaneously, and ink on her left hand and the specific expression she wore when something wasn't adding up the way it should and she was interrogating the gap. Fleur watched them both for a moment. Then she said to the room, "What are you?" The carvings on the walls responded, not by moving, but by becoming more legible, as though her question had brought the light up slightly on a specific section. She crossed to the wall and looked at what the carvings showed, 3 figures, recurring across multiple panels, sometimes together and sometimes separate, but always, she realized as she traced the imagery with her eyes, connected by lines that ran through the stone like veins through a body. 3 figures. 2 women, 1 man? Or, she looked more closely, the gender was less fixed than she'd first read it. 3 souls, more accurately. She understood then. The chamber wasn't hidden because it was secret. It was hidden because it was specific. It had been waiting. The word arrived in her mind not as a thought but as a fact, the way the basin had shown her Harry and Hermione without being asked, the way the wall had been warm before she touched it, for the right frequency. And the right frequency was Veela magic in the presence of its recognized souls. She stayed for 20 minutes. She memorized the layout, the carvings, the basin, the specific texture of the magic. She did not touch the water. She came back upstairs and found Harry and Hermione in the common room and told them about it directly, without preamble. Harry said, "Show us." Hermione said, "I'm getting my notebook." They went the next evening, all 3, and the wall opened immediately this time, no hesitation, as though it had been expecting them, and they went down together and stood in the circular room, and the basin showed nothing because they were all present, nothing to reflect, and the carvings around them seemed to breathe. Hermione went to the walls. She was very quiet for a while, which with Hermione meant she was working. Harry went to the basin and crouched beside it, looking at the water that moved like thought. "It's a monitoring system," he said. "Or a communication system. Or both." "Both," Fleur said. "I think it was built for this specifically. For 3 people with this kind of bond." "Someone new," Harry said. "Someone built the school," Hermione said from the wall. "Look at this section." She pointed at a cluster of carvings near the floor, finer than the rest. Harry and Fleur crossed to her. "These are the 4 founders. I can read the iconographic markers. There's a sword, there's a badger, there's an eagle, there's a serpent. But these 4-inch," she traced a rectangle of carvings above the founders section, "are older. Before them. This chamber wasn't built by Gryffindor or Slytherin. It was here when they arrived." "Built by whom?" Fleur said. "I don't know yet." Hermione sat back on her heels. "But look at the 3 figures in the central panel." She moved her finger to a carving roughly at chest height, the most detailed of all the imagery. 3 figures standing in a circle, hands not clasped but close, and between them, threaded through the space between their palms, something like light rendered in stone. The energy between them is depicted as directional, moving between all 3 points simultaneously. It's not a hierarchy, there's no center figure. It's triangular. Structurally equal. "The bond?" Harry said. "The bond," Hermione confirmed. "This place was built to house it. Or to serve it. Or to..." She stopped. "To sustain it, maybe, when it came into being." Fleur touched the central carving lightly with 2 fingers. "The stone was warm. It waited for us," she said. "That's not scientifically." Hermione started. Hermione. "Fine. It waited for us." They were quiet for a moment, the 3 of them in the chambered silence. "We need to understand it properly before we tell anyone," Harry said. "Agreed," said Fleur. "Agreed," said Hermione, already opening her notebook. "And we need to figure out how it connects to what Umbridge is building toward," Harry said. "Because if this chamber is what I think it is, if it's old, if it's significant, if it responds to the bond specifically, then the Ministry knowing about it is not something we want." Fleur looked at him. "You think Umbridge would try to use it?" "I think she'd try to use anything that gives her leverage over us," Harry said. "The chamber is leverage if you control access to it. We control access to it. So we keep it controlled." "The compact," Fleur said. "What?" She gestured the room, the 3 of them, the carvings. "This. Us. Our agreement about this place." She looked at both of them steadily. I think we should make it formal. Not a legal thing. Not magic. Just a decision. Spoken aloud. That this is ours. That we protect it and we protect each other, and we don't run from what's coming. Hermione had her pen poised over her notebook. She lowered it. Yes, she said. Yes, Harry said. Fleur nodded. Good. She looked at the central carving. Then it is decided. The basin filled with light briefly, soft, warm, silver gold, and then went still. None of them mentioned this to each other. They all noticed it. The Board of Governors arrived on a Friday. Harry knew they were coming because Draco Malfoy had been insufferable for 3 days prior, which was, Harry had worked out, Draco's emotional tell. When something was happening that Draco expected to benefit from, he became insufferable in a specific way, louder, more pointed, more prone to smiling when there was no obvious cause for it. By Thursday evening Harry had mapped the pattern clearly enough to be certain. He told Fleur and Hermione at breakfast on Friday. Board of Governors visiting today, he said. Lucius Malfoy specifically. Hermione looked up. How do you know? Draco. He nodded slightly toward the Slytherin table where Draco was currently eating with the self-satisfaction of someone expecting a delivery. Fleur followed his gaze. His father is visiting and it is making him behave like a child promised a gift, she said. Yes. I noticed Wednesday. Hermione looked between them. I've been in the library, she said slightly defensively. We know, Harry said. We're grateful. You've found something, Fleur told Hermione. Not a question. 2 things, Hermione said, and opened her notebook to a page that was dense with annotated legal text. First, the creature clause, section 12 specifically, the provision Umbridge is using to justify monitoring us, was originally written to protect non-human beings from exploitation by human institutions. The language is protective in origin. What Umbridge is doing is applying the protection as a surveillance mechanism, which is a complete inversion of its legislative intent. And the second thing? Harry said. The second thing is that the 1847 Act includes a provision that allows a formal challenge to any ministry application of the clause to be heard before the Wisengamot, not the full court, but a panel. 3 judges. And the challenge can be submitted by the affected parties directly, which means us, without requiring an adult to submit on our behalf. She looked at both of them. We can fight this ourselves. Legally. Fleur was very still in the focused way. You are certain? I've read the section 14 times, Hermione said. Yes. How long do we have to submit the challenge? 60 days from the date of official ministry notification. McGonagall received that notification on the 4th of September. Hermione looked at her watch. We have 19 days. Harry thought. We file it before the Board of Governors' visit ends today. Whatever Lucius Malfoy is here to do, we want to have moved first. The filing process? Fleur asked Hermione. I have the forms, Hermione said, producing 3 sheets of parchment from inside the notebook with the calm of someone who has been carrying them for 3 days waiting for this moment. Harry looked at her. You had these ready. I found them on Tuesday, she said. I was waiting for the right time to bring it up. Tuesday, Fleur said. You have been carrying this for 3 days. I wanted to make sure I'd read everything correctly first. Harry picked up the top sheet. It was formal ministry parchment, dense with legal language, and at the bottom it had 3 signature lines. He produced his quill. What do we write? Hermione talked them through it. She'd clearly drafted the language in her head already, probably in the library, probably while appearing to read something else. The challenge cited the original protective intent of the clause, the specific overreach of Section 12 as applied to student enrollees, and the right of the affected parties to autonomy as per the 1953 Hogwarts Charter, which apparently guaranteed students' rights to education without ministry interference in matters not pertaining to public safety. Where did you find the Hogwarts Charter? Harry asked. Behind the Goblin Rebellion texts, Hermione said. With the Magical Beings Act. Someone hid both of those books deliberately, Fleur said. Yes, Hermione said. I noticed. They signed all 3 sheets in the corridor outside the Great Hall, using the wall as a flat surface, and then Hermione folded them precisely and said she needed to get them to a ministry owl before the Board of Governors arrived. I'll go, Harry said. The Oli, I know where the Oli is. He was already moving. You 2 go to morning classes. I'll be 20 minutes. He was 15. He came into Transfiguration 4 minutes after the class started, and McGonagall gave him a look that he met without apology or explanation, and she held the look for exactly 3 seconds before turning back to the board because she had decided, he thought, somewhere in the first week, that Harry Potter's reasons for being late were likely to be more interesting and more legitimate than most students. The Board of Governors arrived at 11. Harry first saw them through a window on the 2nd floor, a formal group crossing the grounds from the main gate, 4 people in heavy robes, and at the front of the group, tall and pale with silver blonde hair and the particular Malfoy arrangement, Lucius Malfoy. Even at distance there was something immediately legible about him, the way he moved, precisely, with a cane he didn't need, everything deliberate and nothing accidental. Draco must have been watching the same window from a different floor because he disappeared from visible school traffic for the whole of the morning and reappeared at lunch looking like Christmas. Harry sat with Fleur and Hermione at the Gryffindor table and ate without discussing anything important because the hall had ears and the Slytherin table was close enough. They talked about charms instead, about a modification to the basic levitation charm that Flitwick had mentioned in passing, which Hermione thought could be applied to create a self-sustaining lift structure, which Harry thought was theoretically interesting but practically would need an anchor point, which Fleur said was a first-year problem that a decent architectural charm could solve in about 3 seconds. After lunch, McGonagall found them. "The board wishes to speak with you," she said. "Not you may wish to know or you have been invited. Simply, the board wishes." As though reporting a fact of nature. "All 3 of us?" Harry said. "The request was for Miss Delacour specifically." McGonagall paused. "I told them that Miss Delacour's educational matters would not be discussed without the presence of her fellow students, as the Hogwarts Charter of 1953 guarantees students the right to peer representation in any official inquiry regarding their enrollment." She said this with the specific precision of someone who has also been doing legal research. "They accepted this." Harry looked at McGonagall with real respect. "Thank you, Professor." "Don't thank me," she said. "Be impressive." The meeting room they were taken to was on the 3rd floor, a formal space Harry hadn't been in, with a long table and tall windows and the kind of chairs that were designed to establish hierarchy through height and padding. The 4 governors sat on one side, their chairs were slightly higher. Lucius Malfoy sat at the center. He was more striking in person than Harry had mapped from Draco. The silver blonde hair was his son's, looser. The pale eyes were cold in a way Draco's weren't yet. Draco's coldness was studied, adolescent, still finding its shape. Lucius Malfoy's coldness was the finished thing, the result of decades of deciding that most people were beneath serious consideration. His gaze moved across the 3 of them when they came in, quick and cataloging, and Harry felt himself being assessed and filed away somewhere in a large and ordered system. He also felt the moment Malfoy reached Harry's face and read the scar and made whatever adjustment needed making. "Please sit," Malfoy said. They sat. McGonagall sat beside them, slightly back, in the position of a teacher who has made clear she's there as an observer with opinions. "We've called this meeting," Malfoy began, smooth and well-paced, the voice of someone who has been in meetings his entire adult life, "out of concern for the welfare of all 3 of you. The board takes seriously its responsibility to, Mr. Malfoy," Fleur said. He stopped. "I appreciate the framing," Fleur said, with a courtesy that was perfectly calibrated, neither aggressive nor deferential, simply precise. "But we have 19 days left on our filing window for the Wizengamot challenge, and as of this morning that window has been reduced, since we filed the challenge this morning." She looked at him directly. "So we are past the point where the framing needs to be maintained." Silence. Malfoy looked at Fleur for a moment. Then at Harry. Then back. You filed the Wisengamot challenge, he said. His voice had not changed. His eyes had. We filed it at 9:47 this morning, Hermione said. Under Section 14 of the 1847 Magical Beings Act. The relevant documentation cites the original legislative intent of the Creature Clause, the 1953 Hogwarts Charter provisions on student autonomy, and 3 precedent cases from the 1920s in which the clause's application to mixed heritage students was successfully challenged. She folded her hands on the table. Would you like the case numbers? The governor to Malfoy's left, a small, tight-faced man named Nott, whose son Harry recognized from Slytherin, made a strangled sound. Malfoy did not make any sound. He looked at Hermione with an expression that was the most honest thing he'd shown since they'd walked in, genuine, measured surprise. Not alarm, he was too controlled for alarm, but the recalibration of someone who had arrived in a room expecting a particular kind of meeting and found a different kind. You have been at this school, he said. For 6 weeks. 5.5. Hermione said. And you have filed a formal challenge to a ministry provision. We have, Harry said. Was there something you wanted to discuss? Aside from that. Malfoy looked at Harry. This was the real look, the one he'd been building towards since they'd sat down. Harry returned it with the complete absence of performance. He wasn't performing confidence. He wasn't performing calm. He was simply there, present, looking at a man he decided to understand rather than fear, and the decision was clear in his face. Something moved in Malfoy's expression. Very briefly. It wasn't respect, it wasn't anything Harry would have called warm. But it was acknowledgement, which was its own thing. The board's concern, Malfoy said, returning to his smooth register, is that the Veela bond, an unusual and historically significant magical phenomenon, creates a dynamic within this school that requires careful management. He let the words sit. We have no desire to obstruct anyone's education. We have a responsibility to ensure the school's stability. The bond doesn't destabilize anything, Fleur said. It is ours. It affects the 3 of us. It does not affect the school's stability. The Veela magic is controlled, Fleur said. I have controlled it my entire life. I controlled it before I could walk. She let that sit for a moment. If the concern is Veela charm affecting other students, I invite the board to produce a single documented incident from the past 5.5 weeks. They couldn't. There wasn't one. The concern, Malfoy said, and here his voice shifted, minutely, but Harry caught it, is less about incidents than about precedent. A Veela soul bond at Hogwarts, involving Harry Potter specifically, is not. He paused. It is not a small thing. No, Harry agreed. It isn't. Malfoy looked at him. We know what we are, Harry said. We're not hiding it. We're not managing it in a way that's anyone else's business. And we're not going to be registered, monitored, or filed under a clause that was written to protect people from exactly the kind of institutional overreach you're currently engaged in. He said it in the same tone he'd used with his uncle in the kitchen. Not aggressive. Just clear. Like a statement of geography. Here is where things are. The silence in the room was different now. McGonagall, in her chair slightly behind them, had gone very still in the way of someone controlling a strong reaction. Nott cleared his throat. The other 2 governors, who hadn't spoken yet, looked at Malfoy. Malfoy leaned back in his chair. He looked at the 3 of them, Harry, Hermione, Fleur, and Harry could see him doing the long calculation, not the emotional one but the strategic one. The one that was actually Lucius Malfoy's primary operating mode. The Wisengamot challenge will be heard, Malfoy said finally. The board does not interfere with the legal process. A pause. I trust you have competent legal representation. We are our own legal representation, Hermione said. Another silence. You are 11 years old, Malfoy said. Yes, said Hermione. Malfoy looked at her for a long moment, and Harry thought he saw something in the man's face that wasn't in the meeting's official architecture, something complicated and private, there and gone. The board will not be making further motions regarding the enrollment of Miss Delacour at this time, Malfoy said. He stood. The other governors stood with him, the trained synchrony of people who've been in rooms like this for years. We appreciate the school's cooperation. He left. The other three followed. Nott was the last out, and he gave the three of them a look on his way through the door that was pure compressed fury, the look of someone who expected to win something and has not won it, and who is going to be thinking about this. Harry noted it. The door closed. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Miss Granger, where did you find the 1920s precedent cases? The library, Hermione said. There's a section of historical Wisengamot records that doesn't have a proper index, but if you know what you're looking for, I will need those case numbers, McGonagall said. For the school's records. Of course, Professor. McGonagall stood, straightening her robes with a small precise motion. 5 points each, she said. And I suggest you go to the Oli again, Mr. Potter. I believe you'll find that your filing was received. A pause. And that there is a response. Harry went to the Oli after dinner. The ministry owl waiting there had a return seal on the letter it carried, not the Department for the Regulation of Magical Creatures, but the Wisengamot Administration Office. He broke the seal and read the letter standing in the Oli with the owls watching him with their unnerving collective patience. The challenge had been received. A panel of 3 Wisengamot judges had been assigned. The hearing date was set for the 22nd of November. At the bottom, in a different hand, smaller, sharper, someone had added a single line that wasn't part of the official response. Harry read it twice. Well done. It PWBD. He folded the letter and put it in his pocket, and went back to find Hermione and Fleur. They were in the common room, in the chairs near the window that had become theirs by the simple mechanism of always being there. Other students had worked this out fairly quickly. Hermione was reading. Fleur was writing a letter home, her handwriting its evening loose self. Harry sat in the third chair and produced the letter. They read it. The official part and the addendum. Dumbledore, Hermione said. Yes, Harry said. Fleur looked at the initial. He has been watching, she said. Not alarmed. Thoughtful. From the beginning, Harry said. Since the sorting, at least. Maybe before. Is that a problem? Hermione said. Harry thought about the old man's face at the sorting, the eye expression. The way he'd been watching without acting. The addendum at the bottom of an official ministry letter, which meant he had access to Wisengamot administration and had used it not to interfere but to acknowledge. Not yet, Harry said. But we should decide what we think about it before it becomes one. He's the headmaster, Hermione said. He's on our side, clearly. Being on our side and being aligned with us aren't the same thing, Fleur said quietly. Harry looked at her. No. They're not. They sat with that for a while. The fire was low and warm. Other Gryffindors moved through the common room around them, the twins arguing amiably about something, Neville doing homework at a table with his tongue between his teeth in concentration, a group of third years playing exploding Snap with escalating reactions. Outside the window, the grounds were dark and the lake was flat silver under a quarter moon, and somewhere beneath the castle a circular room was warm and waiting and knew them. The compact, Fleur said. It was barely above a whisper. The compact, Harry agreed. Hermione closed her book. She looked at both of them, the particular look she had that meant she'd reached a conclusion and was comfortable with it. Whatever's coming, she said. We know what we're doing. Yes, Fleur said. Yes, said Harry. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the castle, Peeves was causing a disturbance on the 5th floor that would keep 3 prefects busy until midnight. And in the library behind the Goblin Rebellion texts, there were 2 more books that someone had wanted not to be found, and Hermione had already noted their titles and was planning to retrieve them tomorrow, and Harry had already offered to go with her, and Fleur had already said she knew a charm that would make retrieving hidden things significantly easier. They were, in all the ways that mattered, already moving. Chapter 5: Fire and Legislation. The summons came on a Monday. Not to the students, to McGonagall, at breakfast, delivered by a ministry owl so officious it managed to look down on everyone in the great hall despite being a bird. Harry watched McGonagall read the letter, watched her expression do the small controlled thing it did when she was angry, and knew before she looked up that whatever was in it involved them. She came to the Gryffindor table directly, stood behind Harry's shoulder, and said, quietly enough that only the three of them could hear, Under-Secretary Umbridge will be arriving at Hogwarts this Thursday for what the Ministry is calling a welfare inspection. She will be meeting with each of you individually. A pause. The headmaster has been informed. And? Harry said. And he has expressed his confidence in your ability to handle it. McGonagall's voice carried the specific texture of someone who considers this response inadequate. What does she actually want? Hermione said. The welfare inspection is a preliminary mechanism, McGonagall said. Under the 1901 Magical Minors Act, the Ministry can request individual interviews with students where there is a documented concern for their autonomous welfare. If the interviews produce evidence of, and I am using their language, undue magical influence over a minor's decision-making capacity, they can apply to a separate court for guardianship assessment. Fleur had gone very still. They want to argue that the bond controls us, she said. That we cannot make our own decisions. And if they establish that, they could petition to dissolve the bond, Hermione said. Very quietly. Or to remove one or more of you from the school environment, McGonagall said. On welfare grounds. The great hall went on around them, toast and conversation and the clatter of 1,000 ordinary morning sounds, and the three of them sat in the specific silence of people who have just had the shape of a threat made concrete. Can they do that? Harry said. Legally. Actually do it. The application would be challengeable, McGonagall said. But the process itself, the investigation, the interviews, can be initiated with a relatively low evidentiary threshold. Particularly when the ministry official in question has. She stopped. Particular enthusiasm for the matter. Umbridge has been pushing this since September, Harry said. Yes. So the Wisengamot challenge we filed, the hearing isn't until November 22nd. She's doing this before the hearing to build a parallel case. McGonagall looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said again. Harry thought. He was already running the geometry of it, the timeline, the mechanism, what Umbridge needed from the interviews, what she couldn't use if they didn't give it to her. We'll be fine, he said. McGonagall looked like she wanted to say something more. She nodded instead, precisely, and returned to the staff table. Hermione waited until she was gone. We need to prepare, she said. Obviously, said Fleur. Separately, though, Hermione said. She'll interview us individually. She'll be looking for inconsistencies, things we say that contradict each other, emotional reactions she can characterize as evidence of undue influence. If we over-coordinate our answers, it'll look rehearsed, and she'll push on the gaps. So we don't coordinate answers, Harry said. We coordinate understanding. Exactly. Hermione pulled out her notebook. It was a new one, the third since September, the first two having been filled with a completeness that Fleur had described as beautiful and slightly alarming. We need to each know clearly why we made every decision we made. The Lion Marketplace. The Diagon Alley trip. Transferring to Hogwarts. She looked at Fleur. Why you transferred specifically? She'll push hardest on that. She is welcome to push, Fleur said. I know, Hermione said. I just want to make sure we've thought it through. Not because you can't handle it, because she'll be looking for the emotional pressure point and I want us to know where it is before she finds it. Fleur was quiet for a moment. She will suggest the bond compelled me to transfer. That I had no real choice. Yes. And the truth is that you made a decision, Harry said. You thought about it for weeks, you wrote letters, you talked to your mother, you engaged ministry liaisons, you navigated the transfer process. That's not the behavior of someone compelled by an external force. That's someone making a considered choice. Which I can say, Fleur said. Which you can say, he confirmed. She looked at him for a moment. You are already thinking about the interview itself, aren't you? Not just the preparation. I've been thinking about it since McGonagall walked away, Harry said honestly. What are you thinking? That Umbridge isn't coming for information. She's coming to perform an investigation, which is a different thing. She needs to leave with documentation that supports a conclusion she's already reached. So whatever I say in the interview, she'll interpret it through that lens. He picked up his toast. Which means the interview itself is almost beside the point. Then what's the point? Hermione said. What happens after? Harry said. We need to do something before November 22nd that makes the parallel case she's building impossible to use. Not in the interviews, outside them. The thing they decided to do was, in retrospect, either very brilliant or very reckless or both, which was becoming the characteristic signature of decisions made by all three of them together. Hermione had found, in her continued excavation of the hidden books section of the library, a pamphlet, not a book, a narrow printed pamphlet about 30 pages long, titled The Registered Bond, A Practitioner's Guide to Veela Recognition in Magical Law. It was dated 1887. It was written by a French magical lawyer named Elise Fontaine who had spent 40 years arguing Veela rights cases before both the French Conseil Magique and the British Wiesengemot, and it was the most useful document any of them had read since Hermione had found the 1847 Act. The pamphlet contained, among other things, a provision Harry thought was the cleanest solution to the problem they were facing. The voluntary declaration, Hermione said, on Tuesday evening in the circular chamber, the three of them sitting on the floor around the basin because the chamber had no furniture, and they'd stopped finding this strange. Under Fontaine's framework, which she based on precedent from 7 actual cases, a Veela bond can be voluntarily declared before a recognized magical authority. The declaration establishes legal recognition of the bond as an autonomous magical fact, not a controlling influence. Once it's declared, the ministry cannot subsequently argue that the bond represents undue influence without directly contradicting the declaration. It's like registering a wand, Harry said. Similar principle. The bond exists whether or not it's declared, the declaration just makes it a legal entity rather than a contested phenomenon. And the recognized magical authority? Fleur said. That's the part that requires some thought, Hermione said. The pamphlet lists several options. A ministry official, obviously not, given the circumstances. A school headmaster. Or, she paused, a member of the Wiesengemot. Silence. Fleur looked at Harry. Harry was already thinking. Dumbledore, he said. He's chief warlock of the Wiesengemot. Hermione confirmed. Which makes him a recognized authority for declaration purposes. And he's already indicated. She touched the letter in her notebook, the addendum, the small anilled line. He's watching. He hasn't interfered, but he hasn't ignored us either. We'd have to ask him directly, Harry said. Yes, Hermione said. And tell him about the chamber, Fleur said. They both looked at her. If we're going to ask him to declare the bond formally, he needs to understand what it is, Fleur said. Not just the legal definition. The actual thing. Which includes the chamber. She looked at the walls around them, the carvings, the basin. I have thought about this since we found it. Whether to tell anyone. And I think, if we're choosing who to trust, if we're making that choice deliberately, Dumbledore's the choice. Harry finished. With conditions, Fleur said. We tell him what we decide to tell him. Not what he asks for. We control what information goes where. Agreed, said Harry. Agreed, said Hermione. They requested a meeting with Dumbledore on Wednesday morning by the simple mechanism of Harry walking up to the stone gargoyle outside the headmaster's office during morning break, saying he needed to meet with the professor as soon as possible, and then waiting. The gargoyle regarded him for a moment and then spoke the password, Sherbet Lemon, without being asked, which suggested either that Dumbledore had anticipated this or that the gargoyle made editorial decisions. Dumbledore's office was extraordinary in the way all spaces are extraordinary when they've been occupied by someone with a genuine interior life for a very long time. Books, instruments Harry couldn't name, paintings of old headmasters who pretended to be asleep with varying degrees of conviction. Fawkes was on his perch in the corner, a phoenix, deeply red gold, who regarded Harry with round dark eyes and then made a sound that was not quite a note and not quite a word but somewhere between them. Dumbledore stood when they entered. He was taller than Harry had registered from a distance, and older, and his eyes behind the half-moon glasses were. Harry had been trying to find the right words since September, and settled now on inhabited. There were decades of complicated things living behind those eyes, and he didn't try to hide them. "Please sit," he said, and the warmth in it was genuine in a way that wasn't performance. They sat, the three of them in a row, not because they'd arranged it but because it was where they arranged themselves, naturally, the way the carvings in the chamber showed. Dumbledore sat across from them and looked at all three with an expression that was open in the way of someone who has decided to receive rather than lead. "You wanted to see me," he said. "We need your help," Harry said. Direct. He'd decided directness was the only productive approach with Dumbledore. The old man was too perceptive for anything else and would find evasion more interesting than honesty, which would make the conversation go sideways. "Tell me," Dumbledore said. Harry told him. He told him about Umbridge's Thursday arrival, about the welfare inspection mechanism, about the parallel case being built alongside the Wizengamot challenge. He told him about Hermione's research, about the voluntary declaration, about Fontaine's pamphlet. He told him what they needed. Dumbledore listened the way he did everything, completely, without the slight pre-formulation of response that most adults couldn't help doing while someone else was speaking. When Harry finished, there was a quiet that was comfortable rather than loaded. "The voluntary declaration," Dumbledore said, "is a provision I have not heard invoked in my lifetime. Fontaine's pamphlet is, where did you find it?" "Behind the Goblin Rebellion texts," Hermione said. "Someone hid it deliberately." "Yes," Dumbledore said, without surprise. "I wondered if it was still there." He looked at them for a moment. "I put it there myself, some 30 years ago, following a matter that, well, that is its own story." He leaned forward slightly. "You are asking me to serve as the recognizing authority for the declaration?" "Yes," Harry said. "This would place me in a somewhat complex position with the Ministry." "You're already in a complex position with the Ministry," Harry said. "We're asking you to use it constructively." Something moved in Dumbledore's expression, fast, genuine, the edge of real amusement, and then it settled back into thoughtfulness. "Before I answer," he said, "I want to ask you something." He looked at Fleur. "The transfer, Miss Delacour. Was it your choice?" "Yes," Fleur said simply. Not defensively. Not elaborately. Just yes. "And the bond, does it compel you toward these two specifically? Are you aware of it as an external pressure?" "No," Fleur said. "I am aware of it the way I am aware of my own heartbeat. It is mine. It is not separate from me." Dumbledore looked at Hermione. "Miss Granger. You are Muggle-born. You arrived in this world 6 weeks ago. You have filed a Wizengamot challenge, researched the 1847 Act, and found a pamphlet I hid in 1952. Is there any part of this?" He gestured, indicating everything, the school, the bond, the situation, "that you feel you were not given a genuine choice about?" Hermione considered this honestly, which Harry thought was the right response to Dumbledore. He asked real questions, he deserved real answers. "The bond isn't a choice," she said. "The market wasn't a choice. But everything since then, the letters, the school, the legal challenge, yes. Every one of those was a choice. Several of them were difficult choices." She paused. "I don't think the relevant question is whether the bond is chosen. I think the relevant question is whether the people in it are autonomous. And we are. Dumbledore looked at Harry last. Harry looked back. You're deciding whether to trust us, he said. I made that decision in September, Dumbledore said. I am deciding now how much to tell you about why. Tell us later, Harry said. When it's relevant. Right now I need to know if you'll do the declaration before Thursday. A pause. Yes, Dumbledore said. I will. He opened a drawer and produced. Harry was fairly sure this was another instance of things being prepared before the meeting, which he filed as useful information about Dumbledore, a long sheet of parchment and a silver quill that wrote in both English and what Harry recognized as formal French. The declaration requires 3 witness signatures, the authority's signature, and a spoken affirmation from each party. He set the parchment on the desk. The spoken affirmation is short. 3 words. What 3 words? Hermione said. Dumbledore looked at them over his glasses with the particular warmth of someone who knows the answer is better experienced than explained. You'll know them when you say them, he said. They signed the parchment, Harry first, then Hermione, then Fleur. Dumbledore witnessed each signature with a small mark of his own. Then he stood and set the parchment on the desk between them, and Fawkes, on his perch, turned to face them all and went very still. The affirmation, Dumbledore said, is spoken to each other. Not to me. To each other. Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Fleur. Fleur looked at Harry. And the 3 words arrived in all 3 of them simultaneously, not from outside but from the place in the chest where the bond lived, the warm certain place that had been there since Lion. I see you, Harry said. I see you, said Hermione. I see you, said Fleur. The parchment glowed briefly, silver gold, warm, the same light as the chamber, and then settled into ordinary cream, the signatures clear and permanent. Fawkes sang 3 notes, pure and strange, and the sound seemed to go into the walls. Dumbledore signed at the bottom, dated it, and looked at the 3 of them with an expression Harry had no word for yet. Done, he said. Registered. The Ministry will receive formal notification by morning. Umbridge arrived on Thursday at 10. Harry knew she was in the building before he saw her. There was a quality to how the castle received her that was different from how it received everyone else. Not hostile exactly. More like the way a body responds to something it wants to reject. A slight change in the temperature of corridors she'd walked through. The suits of armor on the 3rd floor standing fractionally more upright than usual. He saw her first crossing the entrance hall, a small woman in an extraordinary quantity of pink, moving with the precise, deliberate step of someone who has decided to control every room before entering it. She wore a wide smile that had nothing to do with happiness. Harry categorized her immediately, not from dislike, though dislike followed shortly, but from the professional habit of understanding people whose decisions might affect you. She was the kind of person who had made a complete, settled peace with herself as the hero of her own very orderly story. She was not unintelligent. She was not careless. She was genuinely convinced that what she was doing was correct, which made her considerably more dangerous than someone who was simply power-hungry, because power-hungry people will take a deal. People who are correct don't make compromises. She interviewed Hermione first. Harry and Fleur waited in the corridor outside the interview room. McGonagall had insisted on being present for each interview, which Umbridge had apparently tried to decline and been overruled on by Dumbledore with the quiet finality he deployed when finality was what was needed. Hermione was in there for 35 minutes. When she came out, she was straightened and precise, and her jaw had the set of someone who has been through something effortful and come through it intact. She looked at Harry and Fleur and said, "She's good," which was the highest warning Hermione issued. "What did she focus on?" Fleur asked. "The transfer," Hermione said. "Fleur's transfer specifically." She kept returning to it from different angles, the timing, the decision, what prompted it. She wanted me to characterize it as sudden or compelled. She looked at Fleur. "I told her it was a decision I watched you make over several months through extensive correspondence, that you engaged legal advisors, and that the process required more active negotiation than most adult educational transfers I've read about. She paused. She didn't like that answer. Because it was too specific? Harry said. Because it was specific and boring, Hermione said. She wants something she can make dramatic. Calm, detailed accuracy doesn't give her anything to work with. They interviewed Fleur second. Harry and Hermione waited. 40 minutes. When Fleur came out, her expression was the contained one. The one Harry had learned meant she'd been pushed at and had chosen to receive it without moving. She looked at both of them and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "She tried to tell me I was lonely before the bond. That I had no real friends and therefore the magical compulsion to seek connection, her phrasing, filled a void that a healthy person would have filled through normal means." "What did you say?" Harry asked. "I said that loneliness and isolation are not the same thing, that I had acquaintances at Beauxbatons and a close relationship with my mother and sister, and that the suggestion that any magical bond must be compelled by pre-existing pathology rather than genuine recognition was an assumption she was welcome to submit to the Wiesengemot panel for their assessment." A pause. "She wrote a lot of things down after that." "That's good," Hermione said. "It means she's logging it for the Wiesengemot case. Which means she'll submit it. Which means the panel will read it. And the panel will see someone arguing that a magical bond is pathology," Harry said. "Which is going to read very well for us and very badly for her." Fleur looked at him. "You wanted her to write it down." "I wanted whichever of us she pushed at to say something specific enough to get written down," Harry said. "You said it better than I could have scripted." Fleur looked at him for a moment longer. "Sometimes you are very annoying," she said, which was now their second highest compliment, after Hermione's occasionally very annoying. Harry's interview was last. Umbridge was behind the desk when he came in, pink and precise and smiling. McGonagall sat in the corner chair with her back very straight. Harry sat in the chair across from Umbridge and looked at her directly and waited. "Harry," she said, and the warmth she loaded into the single syllable was extraordinary in its emptiness. "It's so wonderful to meet you. I've been looking forward to this." "I doubt that," Harry said pleasantly. The smile flickered. Recovered. "I just want to have a little chat," she said. "About how you're settling in. About your friendships. The bond is a legally recognized magical fact as of yesterday morning," Harry said. "The voluntary declaration was filed under Fontaine's 1887 framework, witnessed by Albus Dumbledore as Chief Warlock of the Wiesengemot. The Ministry received formal notification at 7:43 this morning. I'm sure your office has already received the documents." Umbridge's smile became a different kind of thing. "Yes," she said. "We received them." "Then you know the autonomous welfare investigation can't produce the result you came here for," Harry said. "The declaration establishes the bond as a legally recognized autonomous magical entity, which means by definition it cannot simultaneously constitute undue magical influence over a minor. The two legal positions are mutually exclusive. That interpretation is Fontaine's," Harry said, "who argued it successfully in 7 precedent cases, 3 of which are cited in our Wiesengemot filing." He folded his hands in his lap. "So I'm wondering what you actually wanted to talk about. Because it's not welfare." The smile was gone now. What replaced it was more honest and also more dangerous, the focused expression of someone who has decided to drop the performance and engage with the actual situation. "You're 11 years old," Umbridge said. "Yes," Harry agreed. "You've filed a Wiesengemot challenge, arranged a voluntary declaration through the Chief Warlock, and apparently memorized enough magical law to conduct this interview more effectively than most adults I speak with." She leaned forward slightly. "Don't you find that unusual?" "I find it necessary," Harry said. "Which is different." "Why necessary?" "Because you came to my school to build a case against 3 children," Harry said. "And someone had to be paying attention." Umbridge was quiet for a moment. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't anticipated, not quite anger, not quite calculation. Something closer to genuine curiosity, which was its own kind of unsettling because it suggested she was capable of it. "The bond concerns the ministry," she said, and for the first time her voice was direct. No warmth, no performance. Just the actual content. Not because of what it is. Because of who you are. Harry Potter and a Veela recognition bond at Hogwarts is not an ordinary event. No, Harry agreed. It has implications. Everything has implications, Harry said. The question is whose interests the ministry is managing when it decides which implications to be concerned about. Umbridge's jaw tightened. "I'm not trying to be difficult," Harry said, which was the most technically accurate thing he'd said all interview. "I'm trying to be clear. We're not a threat. We're not unstable. We're not being controlled. And we're not going to cooperate with any process that treats us as though we might be." He stood. "Is there anything else?" Umbridge looked at him for a long moment. "You'll be hearing from the ministry," she said. "The hearing is November 22nd. "I know," Harry said. "We'll be there." She blinked. "Students don't attend Wiesengemot hearings." "We filed the challenge," Harry said. "We're the affected parties. The 1847 Act allows affected parties to attend and speak at their own hearing." He smiled at her, a real one, which in context was probably its own form of provocation. "I'm sure your office knows that. Good afternoon, Undersecretary." He left. McGonagall caught up with him in the corridor. She walked beside him without speaking for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "Where did you learn that the 1847 Act allows affected party attendance?" "Hermione told me this morning," Harry said. A pause. "The ministry will be very unhappy about this." "Probably." "Are you prepared for that?" Harry thought about the chamber, the basin, the three figures on the carvings, the warm stone and the declaration parchment glowing silver gold. He thought about Fleur on a boat crossing the lake, saying it waited for us. He thought about Hermione in the library on a Tuesday with ink on her hand and 3 books open and the specific expression she had when something wasn't adding up and she was going to stay until it did. "Yes," he said. "On the night of November 21st, the night before the hearing, they went to the chamber. They didn't plan it. After dinner, without discussing it, all 3 of them went to the dungeon corridor, and the wall was already warm before Fleur touched it. They went down and sat around the basin, and the water moved in its thoughtful patterns, and the carvings surrounded them, and it was very quiet." "Tomorrow," Hermione said. "Yes," said Fleur. Harry looked at the basin. It wasn't showing anything tonight, no reflections, no images. Just the moving water, slow and intentional. "Tell me something," he said. Not to either of them specifically. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, "My parents told me this week. They wanted to know how things were going. I told them, actually told them, not the edited version I usually give people." She paused. "My mum wrote back and said she'd always known I was too much for one world. She meant it kindly," Fleur said. "My grandmother came to visit last month. Full Veela. She is extraordinary. Frightening in the way of something very old, and very genuine. She sat with me for a long time and she did not speak. And then she said, in French, old French, the kind she uses, she said, Les âmes que essaient reconnaissant ne essaient perdent jamais. Souls that recognize each other are never lost." She was quiet. "I had not understood that before. I do now." Harry thought for a moment. Then he said, "When I was 7, I climbed onto the roof of the school building. I don't know why. I was running from Dudley and his friends and I ended up on the roof and it was fine. Good. I could see everything and nothing could reach me, and for about 20 minutes I wasn't anyone's problem." He looked at the water. "I used to think that was the best I could hope for. Being where nothing could reach me." He looked at both of them. "It's not." The basin lit up, briefly, warmly, and they sat in the glow of it until it faded. The morning of November 22nd was cold and clear. They took a ministry carriage from Hogwarts at 8, Dumbledore had arranged it, quietly, efficiently, the way he arranged most things, and arrived at the Ministry of Magic through a visitor's entrance that a ministry clerk tried to redirect them away from until Dumbledore looked at him. The Wizengamot chamber was not as Harry had imagined. He'd pictured something austere, theatrical. What it was functional, a large circular room, tiered seating around the edges, a lower central floor where the affected parties stood, and at the front 3 judges who were old in the way of people who have been thinking carefully for a very long time. Umbridge was already there, seated to the side with a stack of parchment, and a junior minister Harry didn't know. She was in pink again. She watched the 3 of them enter with an expression Harry couldn't quite read, not confident exactly, but not worried either. And behind her, in the tiered seating, unexpectedly, Lucius Malfoy. Fleur spotted him at the same moment Harry did. He caught her micro-expression, a slight recalibration, then steadiness. "He's here to watch," Fleur said, very quietly, as they took their position on the lower floor. "Or to intervene if the result doesn't suit him," Harry said. "Do we adjust?" Hermione said. "No," Harry and Fleur said simultaneously. The lead judge, a woman named Griselda Marchbanks, whose reputation Hermione had briefed them on during the carriage ride, who had been examining students at Hogwarts for over a century and examining everything else in the wizarding world with equivalent thoroughness, called the hearing to order with the brisk efficiency of someone who values other people's time as an extension of valuing her own. Hermione spoke first. She presented the legal challenge with the focused clarity of someone delivering something they have built carefully and know the structural integrity of. She cited the Fontaine precedents. She cited the original legislative intent. She cited the voluntary declaration and its implications for the parallel welfare investigation. She was 11 years old, and she spoke for 22 minutes without a note, and when she finished the chamber was quiet in the way of rooms where something true has just been said clearly. Fleur spoke second. She addressed the Veela bond directly, what it was, what it felt like, what it was not. She spoke about autonomous choice. She spoke about loneliness and recognition as distinct categories. She spoke in the precise, warm, unflinching way of someone who has decided that the best argument for her own humanity is to be unmistakably human, and she was so completely herself in every word of it that even Umbridge's note-taking hand slowed. Harry spoke last. He hadn't prepared the way Hermione had. He'd thought about it, but he'd learned enough about himself over the past months to know that prepared speeches were not his strength. What he had instead was clarity, about what had happened, who he was, and what he needed the panel to understand. He told them about Lion, the market, the light, 2 people he hadn't known an hour before. He told it simply and directly, as a story rather than an argument, because stories carry things arguments can't. He told them about the letters, the months of correspondence, the choices, Fleur's, Hermione's, his own, that had been made not in the grip of magic but in the ordinary deliberate way of people who decide what they want their lives to look like. He talked about the voluntary declaration and what the 3 words meant, "I see you," because the panel deserved to understand what they were ruling on, not just the legal architecture around it. He said, "We are not asking you to protect us. We can do that. We're asking you to rule on whether the ministry's application of this law is legitimate, because if it is, then any student with non-standard magical traits can be subjected to welfare investigations designed to reach predetermined conclusions, and I think the Wizengamot has an interest in that not being the precedent." He stopped talking. Griselda Marchbanks looked at him for a long moment over her half-moon glasses, which were different from Dumbledore's in the specific way of someone who has come to the same conclusion by a different route. "You are 11, she said. "Yes," Harry said. "And you decided to argue your own case before the Wizengamot." "Yes." "Why not use a lawyer?" "Because it's our case," Harry said. "Not a lawyer's. It felt wrong to hand it to someone else." Marchbanks looked at him for another moment. Then she looked at the other 2 judges and they had a quiet, brief conversation Harry couldn't hear. Umbridge was very still. Lucius Malfoy, in the tiered seating, was watching Harry with an expression that had left all its masks at home. Marchbanks turned back. "The panel will deliberate," she said. "You may be seated." They waited for 40 minutes. Dumbledore sat 3 rows behind them and said nothing, and Harry was glad of him in the specific way you're glad of someone who understands that presence is sometimes the right thing and words are not. At 11:47, Marchbanks returned. "The panel finds," she said, "that the application of Section 12 of the Creature Clause to enrolled students of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry constitutes a legislative overreach inconsistent with the provision's original protective intent. The welfare investigation conducted by the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures is hereby ruled procedurally invalid. The voluntary declaration filed under the Fontaine framework is recognized as legally definitive." She looked at them. "The Ministry's case is dismissed." The junior minister beside Umbridge wrote something on his parchment very fast. Umbridge sat perfectly still. Her face had not changed. She was, Harry thought, the kind of person who absorbed defeat by reclassifying it internally, and she was reclassifying this now, and she would not stop, and she would be back. He knew this with complete clarity, and filed it accordingly. Lucius Malfoy stood from his seat in the gallery, unhurried, and left without looking at anyone. Outside the Ministry, on the pale November street, Hermione pulled a very controlled breath through her nose and then said, "We won." "Yes," said Harry. "We actually won," she said, as though she'd been certain of the logic and was now verifying the experimental result. "You are surprised?" Fleur said. "No," Hermione said. "I'm relieved that surprised and correct are the same thing today." Fleur looked at Harry. Something in her expression, the contained warmth, the silver-gray eyes, was simply open. Not guarded, not managed. Just open. "Les aims que esi reconnaissant," she said. "Tell me," Harry said. "Souls that recognize each other," she said, "are never lost." The carriage back to Hogwarts moved through the grey London afternoon, the city giving way to countryside giving way to Scotland, and the 3 of them sat in the warm interior and were quiet together in the particular way of people who have been through something real and don't need to narrate it because they were all there. Outside, the first snow of the year had begun to fall. Chapter 6: What We Are. The snow held for 3 weeks. Hogwarts in December was the castle at its most deliberately beautiful. Frost on the windows each morning in patterns that Hermione had established were not entirely random, the great hall ceiling showing stars so clear and cold they looked close enough to touch, the grounds white and still in the early hours before anyone else was up. Harry had started waking at 6, which surprised him because he'd never been a willing early riser, but something about the post-hearing quiet had shifted his rhythm. He'd wake, pull on his cloak, and walk for an hour before breakfast, the battlements, the grounds, sometimes the corridor with the warm wall, and he'd think. He was thinking about Dumbledore. Not anxiously. More the way you think about a complicated piece of architecture, trying to understand how it was built and why, not because you distrust it but because understanding it tells you something about what it can hold. The old man had not spoken to them after the hearing. Had not sought them out, had not delivered any verdict on what they'd done or what it meant. He'd simply been there, on the carriage, in the Ministry corridor, and then back at Hogwarts the following morning as though nothing particular had occurred, moving through the school with his characteristic unhurried attention. Harry had been waiting for him to say something. By December, he was fairly sure the silence was deliberate. Dumbledore was, he'd concluded, the kind of person who gave you room to finish becoming whatever you were going to become before he started talking to you about it. Which was either very wise or very calculated or probably both. The end-of-term incident happened on a Thursday, 2 weeks before Christmas break. Harry, Fleur, and Hermione were coming back from the library. Hermione had found the last 2 hidden books, which turned out to be a theoretical text on bond magic and an unpublished collection of Veela historical accounts that someone had translated from medieval French and then apparently tried very hard to forget about, when they heard it. A first-year girl, lavender brown, backed against the wall of the second-floor corridor by Marcus Flint and 2 of his usual company. No wand drawn, Flint never drew wands, had never needed to. He simply used space and volume and the well-practiced technique of standing between someone and where they wanted to go. He was saying something about blood status. The specific word wasn't audible from where they were. Flint had learned, after the first week, to keep his volume calibrated, but the architecture of it was clear from how Lavender was standing. The way people stand when they're trying to take up no space at all. Harry handed the books he was carrying to Hermione without looking at her. She took them without looking at him. He walked down the corridor at a normal pace. Not fast, not slow. The pace of someone who has a specific destination and has already decided what happens when they get there. Flint heard him coming and turned. He saw Harry and his expression did the thing it always did, the slight recalibration between contempt and something more careful, and then contempt winning. He'd never quite recalibrated the contempt out of the equation, and Harry had always thought this was going to be Flint's real problem. "Potter," he said. "Move," Harry said. Flint didn't move. He had 5 inches on Harry and several stone and the practiced indifference of someone who has been physically imposing since early adolescence, and has organized his entire social identity around it. "This isn't your conversation," he said. "Lavender," Harry said past Flint, to the girl against the wall. "Go to Fleur. She's at the end of the corridor." Lavender moved immediately, the particular speed of someone who's been offered a clear exit, and Flint moved to block her, which was a mistake. Not because Harry stopped him physically. Because he didn't need to. The corridor lights didn't change. The temperature didn't change. But something in the ambient quality of the space became very specific, the way air becomes specific before lightning. Flint stopped moving. He was looking at Harry's face, and what he saw there made him stop, not because of threat. Harry's expression was entirely calm, but because calm, on Harry's face, in this moment, communicated something that threats from most people don't. Lavender slipped past. Harry heard her footsteps down the corridor toward Fleur. Harry looked at Flint. "We've had this conversation before," Harry said. "Different corridor, different person, same structure. I told you I have a good memory." He kept his voice level and quiet and looked at Flint directly the way he'd looked at Malfoy in the meeting room and Umbridge in the interview room and every other person who needed to be looked at clearly. "You've been careful. Staying below the threshold of what gets reported. Which is smart tactically." He paused. "But it doesn't actually work if the person paying attention has decided to pay attention to you specifically." "You're threatening me," Flint said. "I'm informing you," Harry said. "There's a difference. You're a first year," Flint said, and the contempt was back but thinner now, stretched over something less certain underneath. "Yes," Harry said. "And you've been cornering first years in corridors for the last 2 years, which Hermione established from about 20 minutes of talking to second years who all had the same story and none of whom thought reporting it would accomplish anything." He tilted his head slightly. "You should know that conversation happened. And that the notes from it exist. And that they've been given to Professor McGonagall, who has, out of fairness, and because she's a genuinely principled person, held them pending a third incident." Flint went very still. "This is the third incident," Harry said. He stepped back. That was all. Just one step back, creating space, making it possible for Flint to leave without it being a rout. He'd learned, from months of watching Fleur manage exactly this kind of situation, that giving someone an exit was not weakness. It was the most efficient way to end something cleanly. Flint looked at him for a moment. Looked at the 2 students with him, who had been silent throughout, and who were now looking at Flint with the particular expression of people reassessing an alliance. Flint left. His company followed. Harry stood in the empty corridor for a moment. Then Hermione arrived beside him, still holding all the books, and Fleur came from the other end with Lavender, who was wide-eyed and grateful and directed at the Gryffindor common room by Fleur with the warm, firm efficiency she applied to most logistical problems. "That was elegant," Fleur said when Lavender was gone. "The notes exist?" Hermione said, looking at Harry. "Of course they exist. You compiled them," I didn't know you'd told McGonagall. I haven't yet, Harry said. I'm going to now. But I wanted him to believe I already had. Hermione looked at him. Then she said, I'll come with you. I know. McGonagall listened to all three of them in her office with the careful attention she gave to things she intended to act on. She reviewed the notes Hermione had compiled, reading each page thoroughly rather than scanning, and then set them on her desk and was quiet for a moment. Why did you compile these? She said to Hermione. Because the pattern needed documenting, Hermione said. And why didn't you bring them to me sooner? Hermione thought about this honestly. I wanted to be certain, she said. And I wanted to understand the pattern completely before framing it for someone else. Partial information about a pattern is more dangerous than no information. McGonagall looked at her. Yes, she said. It is. She looked at all three of them. This will be handled. She left it at that, no elaboration, no performance of severity. Simply, it will be handled. It was. Flint lost his Quidditch captaincy 2 days later, which was, in the social ecosystem of Hogwarts, the appropriate calibration. He didn't bother any first years again. Whether this was because of the captaincy or because of the specific quality of Harry's expression in the corridor, Harry neither knew nor particularly cared. The hidden books turned out to be extraordinary. They read them over the following week, trading sections, leaving notes for each other in the margins with different coloring so they could track the conversation. The theoretical bond magic text was written by a wizard named Albrecht Voss in the 1700s, working from earlier sources, and it laid out the most comprehensive mechanical description of Veela recognition bonds that any of them had found. The bond, Voss argued, was not a biological phenomenon but a metaphysical one, the magical signature of a soul in the presence of souls it was built to know. It had no directing force outside the individuals themselves. It strengthened what was already there. It created nothing that wasn't. The Veela historical accounts were different in register, narrative rather than theoretical. 12 translated accounts from Veela women describing their recognition experiences across several centuries. Fleur read these in one sitting and came to breakfast the following morning quieter than usual, and Harry and Hermione both understood this and said nothing, because sometimes the right response to a thing that has moved someone is simply to be present. By the time she was ready to talk about it, they were in the circular chamber, the basin lit softly, December making the castle quiet above them. There is an account from the 15th century, Fleur said. A Veela named Amy. Her recognition was for 2 people, like mine. She wrote. She had the book in her hands open. She wrote, Je pas compris pourquoi du, jusqu'à ce que j'ai comprenne que certaines choses ne peuvent pas être portées seules. She looked up. I did not understand why too, until I understood that some things cannot be carried alone. Neither Harry nor Hermione said anything immediately. She was happy? Hermione said finally. She was honest, Fleur said. She writes about difficulty. About people misunderstanding the bond, about managing others' discomfort. About the 3 of them navigating a world that did not have a category for what they were. She paused. But yes. At the end of the account, she writes about sitting with her 2 and watching the sun come up over whatever town they were in, and she says, something that does not translate exactly, something like, this is what I was for. The chamber was warm and quiet. That's enough, Harry said. Yes, Fleur agreed. Hermione was looking at the carvings. She'd been studying them systematically for weeks, taking rubbings, cross-referencing the imagery against the historical texts, and she'd built up a picture of what the chamber was, or had been, that she'd been waiting to share until it was complete. I know what this is, she said. They looked at her. She stood and went to the central carving, the 3 figures, the threaded light between their palms, and traced the border of the panel without touching it. This chamber predates the school by several hundred years. The imagery is consistent with a pre-Hogwarts magical tradition that the books call the compact tradition, small communities of magical practitioners who organized around what they called essential bonds. Not marriages, not families. Something more structural. Bonds between people whose combined magical signature was stable in a way individual signatures weren't. Stable how? Harry said. The theory is that certain magical signatures are complementary at a fundamental level, not just compatible, actually completing each other. Like, she thought. Like three instruments that create a harmonic when played together that none of them produce separately. The chambers they built, there are apparently others, Voss references them, were designed to anchor the bond. To give it a physical location that could sustain it through periods of separation or stress. The basin, Fleur said. When I was alone it showed me you. Because the bond was anchored here, Hermione said. It had a place to reach from. She turned. The original practitioners built these chambers because they understood something that got lost when the Hogwarts founders organized everything into the house system, that some people are bound together in ways that transcend institution. And they built a room for it. And someone built this one in a school, Harry said. Under a school, Hermione said. Which means someone expected a bond like this to happen here. Specifically here. She looked at both of them. I don't know who. Yet. Harry looked at the carvings. He looked at the Founders section, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and at the older imagery above it. Dumbledore, he said. What about him? He knows about this chamber. He put the Fontaine pamphlet in the library. He put the books. Harry was thinking aloud in the way he did when he was close to something, more instinctive than deductive, following the feeling of the thing. He's been setting things up. Not for us specifically, he couldn't have known we were coming. But for the possibility of us. He looked at Hermione. And he wrote well done on the bottom of a ministry letter. So, Hermione said, he knows about the chamber. He knows everything about this school, Harry said. The question is what he thinks about it. We should ask him, Fleur said. Yes, Harry said. We should. The last week of term had its own energy, trunks being dragged down from dormitories, the specific elation of people counting down to departure, the Hogwarts Express smell already anticipating itself in imagination. Most of the school was going home for Christmas. Harry was staying. The Dursleys had confirmed this through a letter of such determined brevity that it had contained only the word fine in response to his question about holiday arrangements, which he'd taken as yes without asking for clarification. Hermione was going home. Fleur was going back to France. They had 3 days left together when Harry knocked on the gargoyle outside Dumbledore's office. The gargoyle said lemon drop this time, which Harry thought was functionally equivalent to sherbet lemon and probably deliberate whimsy. Dumbledore was at his desk. Fawkes was on his perch. The portraits were, as usual, pretending to be asleep with the committed amateur energy of people who have been doing it for centuries and still can't quite manage convincing. The three of them sat. Harry, Hermione, Fleur. In a row, as always. Dumbledore looked at them and something in his face was different from their previous meetings. The waiting quality was gone. He was looking at them as though something he'd been expecting to see had arrived. The chamber, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. You know about it. I have known about it since my second year as a student, Dumbledore said. I found it by accident, or what I believed at the time to be accident. I later came to suspect it found me. He folded his hands. But it did not respond to me the way it has responded to you. The basin did not light. The carvings did not come legible. I was permitted inside, I think, because I could be trusted not to misuse it. But I was not. He paused, choosing the word carefully. Called. We were, Fleur said. Yes. His eyes went to her. The chamber was built, as you have likely worked out by now, as part of the compact tradition. It was built here by one of the original magical community that occupied this site, before the founders, before the school. It was built for a specific purpose, to anchor a bond of the kind that comes along perhaps once in several generations. Why here? Hermione said. Because this site is a nexus, Dumbledore said. A place where the lines of magical resonance in the earth cross with unusual density. The original community understood this. The founders chose this site partly because of that understanding, partly because of the existing structures they found here. He looked at the three of them. The chamber has been waiting for the right bond for a very long time. I believe the site itself, the magic of the place, has been contributing to the conditions that made your meeting in Lyon possible. The market, Harry said. Magical nexus points amplify certain phenomena over wide geographic areas, Dumbledore said. Lyon has its own minor nexus. When two nexuses. He paused. The technical term is unwieldy. The point is that Lyon and Hogwarts exist in a relationship with each other, energetically, that made your meeting marginally more likely than chance alone. Marginally? Hermione said, with the specific dryness she deployed when she felt something was being undersold. Significantly, then, Dumbledore conceded, with a slight smile. You put the books in the library, Harry said. I put those books in the library in 1952, Dumbledore said, without hesitation or evasion. I put them where they could be found by someone who was looking for exactly them, hidden enough that they wouldn't be casually encountered, accessible enough that someone sufficiently motivated could find them. Why 1952? Fleur asked. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Because in 1952 I encountered a situation that convinced me such a bond would occur again within the school's future. I wanted the resources to be available when it did. He looked at them steadily. I was not certain it would be your generation. I was not certain of the specific individuals. But I was certain it would come. What happened in 1952? Hermione said. Another pause. Longer. Dumbledore looked out the window at the December grounds, white and still, and when he turned back he had the expression of someone making a decision about how much truth to give and landing on all of it. There was a student, he said. A boy in his 6th year. Extraordinarily talented. He had formed a bond, not a Veela bond, a different kind, equally old, with 2 other students. The bond was recognized and real. And the ministry at the time. He stopped. They did not have Hermione's legal knowledge or your willingness to act. The ministry intervened. The bond was forcibly disrupted. The chamber below them seemed to shift in Harry's awareness. The warm stone, the basin, the carvings. What happened to them? Fleur asked quietly. The boy became someone very different from who he might have been, Dumbledore said. The disruption of a genuine bond at that level. He chose his words. It doesn't destroy a person. But it removes something that cannot be replaced by anything else. It changes the shape of what they become. You knew him, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Yes. Is this why you've been watching us from the beginning? Yes, Dumbledore said simply. I knew what you were from the moment I saw the 3 of you at the sorting. And I decided, very deliberately, that I would not make the same mistake that was made in 1952. He leaned forward slightly. I want to be clear about something. I have not been managing you. I have not been steering you toward outcomes. What I have been doing is ensuring that the resources existed, legal, historical, magical, for you to make your own choices with complete information. The pamphlet, Hermione said. The books, Fleur said. The letter on the ministry response, Harry said. The carriage to the Wiesengemot. Being the recognizing authority for the declaration. Yes, Dumbledore said to all 3. All of that. Harry looked at him for a long moment. He thought about what he'd said to Fleur months ago, in the Hogwarts correspondence. Being on our side and being aligned with us aren't the same thing. He thought about the compact declaration, I see you. He thought about what it meant to trust someone who was working from a different scale of time, who saw patterns over decades rather than months, who was genuinely not trying to control the outcome but was also genuinely not standing aside. I want something from you, Harry said. Tell me, Dumbledore said. Honesty, Harry said. Not full disclosure. I understand there are things you can't tell us at 11 that you'll be able to tell us later. I'm not asking for everything. But when something directly concerns us, I want to know. Not filtered, not paced, not given to us in the amount you think we can handle. Directly. Dumbledore was quiet. We handled the Wisengamot, Harry said. We handled Umbridge. We handled Malfoy in a meeting room. We found the chamber, and we read the books, and we filed the challenge, and we made the declaration. We are not fragile. He held Dumbledore's gaze. We would like to stop being treated as though we might be. The silence in the office was a different kind from the other silences they'd sat in with him. More equal. More considered. That is a fair thing to ask, Dumbledore said. Is it something you can give? Fleur said. Dumbledore looked at her. I can give you this. There are things coming, not this year, not immediately, that concern you specifically. Concerns older than your bond, older than this school year, older than you are. He paused. I will not tell you those things tonight because I am genuinely uncertain that tonight is the right time, not because I think you cannot hear them. There is a difference. When? Harry said. When I am certain of what I know rather than what I suspect. Dumbledore said. I think that is more honest than the alternative, which is telling you the shape of something before I know its edges. Harry thought about this. It was, he conceded internally, a more defensible position than he'd expected. He'd been prepared for deflection. This was something else, a boundary that was offered with a genuine reason rather than a management strategy. All right, he said. But when you're certain, you'll know, Dumbledore said. You have my word. Hermione had been quiet through most of this. Now she said, the student from 1952. The disrupted bond. Can you tell us who he became? Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window. When he turned back, his expression had the complicated inhabited quality at its fullest, all the decades and the decisions and the things he carried that weren't his to put down. His name, Dumbledore said, was Tom Riddle. The name landed in the office like a stone in the basin, ripples spreading out from it, implications moving in all directions at once. Hermione's breath caught. Fleur was absolutely still. Harry felt the thing in his chest, the bond warmth, the warm certain place, react not in fear but in the specific recognition of when something important has arrived and changed the shape of the room. He thought about the scar on his forehead. He thought about Ollivander's voice, the phoenix whose tail feather is in your wand gave another feather. He thought about the way Dumbledore had looked at him at the sorting. He thought about Lucius Malfoy's name on ministry paperwork and Umbridge's deliberate, patient case building and the particular quality of how adults talked around certain things in his presence, the things they stopped themselves saying, the looks exchanged over his head. He thought about the chamber, the basin, the carvings, Amy in the 15th century writing some things cannot be carried alone. He thought about Fleur saying something is coming, I can feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives. He's not gone, Harry said. It wasn't a question. He was looking at Dumbledore and Dumbledore was looking back at him, and neither of them was performing anything. No, Dumbledore said. He is not gone. He is diminished. Dangerous in the way of things that have been reduced but not destroyed and are not willing to accept that distinction. A pause. He made choices, in the aftermath of the disruption, that removed him progressively from everything that had once made him, human is perhaps too simple a word, from everything that had once made him capable of being known by others. And the scar, Harry said. The scar is a consequence of a night you don't remember. Of magic that was not meant for you and that your mother answered in a way that changed everything. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. You are not marked by him as a possession or a continuation. You are marked because the magic that night was powerful enough to leave a trace. That is all. It doesn't connect us, Harry said. It connected your wands, Dumbledore said. The same phoenix. Which means if he returns, when he is able to attempt a return, there will be a resonance between your magic and his that will matter. But it does not define you. It does not own any part of you. He said this with the directness of someone delivering a truth they'd been waiting to deliver properly. Nothing about Tom Riddle defines you. You are not a continuation of his story. You are the beginning of your own. Harry looked at Dumbledore for a moment. Then he looked at Hermione, who was processing, her expression doing the rapid assessment thing it did when she was building a new structural understanding of something. And Fleur, who was watching Harry with the open expression, the unguarded one, and whose jaw had a tension that he recognized as the tension of someone who has found something that threatened what she cares about, and is deciding how to respond. He reached out. Not a gesture, not a touch, just a slight shift toward both of them. The bond warmed. "We need to know more," Harry said to Dumbledore. "About all of it. Not tonight. But we're not going to wait until someone decides we're old enough. We're going to learn what we need to learn, and we prefer to do it with your help rather than despite you." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I know." He sat back down. "Which is why I am going to tell you this. Starting next term, I intend to give the three of you access to a portion of the Hogwarts library that is not typically accessible to students below 5th year. The restricted section is too broad a categorization. There is a specific collection that Voss, Fontaine, and your chamber's original architects all drew from. I will arrange access." He paused. "With the understanding that what you find there informs your choices and doesn't replace them." "Agreed," Hermione said. "Agreed," said Fleur. "Agreed," Harry said. He looked at Dumbledore. "Thank you?" "For 1952. For the books. For the letter." Dumbledore looked at him with the inhabited eyes, all the decades in them. "I have been waiting," he said, "for the right people to be ready for that chamber. It is good to see it used." They left the office into the corridor, the castle settling around them into its late evening sounds, the distant creak of the building adjusting to cold, the muffled chaos of Peeves somewhere far above, the regular deep resonance that was just Hogwarts being itself. They walked. Not toward the common room immediately, just walked, the three of them, through the second floor and up the back stairs and out onto the battlements where the air was cold and clean and the grounds lay below them in their white December stillness. Harry leaned on the battlements and looked at the lake, black and mirror-flat under the stars. "Tom Riddle," Hermione said. "Yes," Harry said. "And he's coming back. Eventually," Harry said. Dumbledore didn't say when. "But yes. Eventually. Then we have time to prepare," Fleur said. "Yes. We have time to learn everything in that collection," Hermione said, and there was something in her voice, not bravado, not performance, something that was simply Hermione understanding that a problem has been given a shape and can therefore be worked on. "And the chamber," Fleur said. "We don't know everything it can do. The basin, the carvings. Voss suggests the physical anchor of a bond can function as a location for certain kinds of magic that are," she thought, "more than the sum of individual practice." "Combined casting," Harry said from Voss's text. 3 bonded practitioners in a physically anchored space. He describes results that aren't replicable any other way. "We should practice it," Hermione said. "We've been practicing it," Fleur said. "We just didn't have the name for it." She looked at them both. "Every time we go to the chamber. Every time we make a decision together that we couldn't have made separately. That is already the thing." They stood on the battlements and the cold was sharp and alive and the stars were doing the December thing where they looked close enough to be concerned about, and below them the grounds were white and the castle was warm behind them and the bond was there the way it was always there, not forcing, not compelling, just present and warm and certain. The thing that had known them in a marketplace in Lyon and had been right about what it knew. "I've been thinking about something," Harry said. They waited. "What Amy wrote," he said. "What Fleur's grandmother said. What Dumbledore said about Riddle, about the disruption and what it made him." He looked at the lake. "All of it comes down to the same thing, doesn't it? The bond isn't the power. It's not the weapon or the advantage. It's the—" He tried to find the right word and couldn't find it in English, which was happening more often. "The condition," he said. "The thing that makes it possible to use everything else. Because alone." Fleur started. "Alone I'm a boy in a cupboard who's angry and has nowhere to put it," Harry said. Alone I'm powerful, yes. Alone I'm also completely isolated. And isolated things become. He didn't say Riddle's name again. They become something else. And together? Hermione said. Harry looked at them. At Hermione, who was made of research and precision and a courage she wore as competence because no one had ever told her they were the same thing. At Fleur, who was made of silver fire and perfect self-possession and the decision, made daily, to be exactly who she was in every room she walked into regardless of what that cost her. Together, he said, we're the kind of thing that walks into the Wizengamot at 11 and wins. The kind of thing that finds a chamber that's been waiting centuries. The kind of thing that... He stopped. Not because he'd run out of words but because the words were insufficient. This, he said. This is what we are. Fleur looked at him for a moment. Then she said in French, quiet enough that it was only for them. Trois aims. Un direction. 3 souls? Hermione translated softly. 1 direction. Yes, Fleur said. Harry looked at the white grounds, the black lake, the closed stars. He thought about what was coming, not with dread, not with the particular clenched anxiety of someone who can't affect outcomes. With the clear-eyed focus of someone who can. Tom Riddle, diminished and patient. Lucius Malfoy, calculating. Umbridge, reclassifying her defeat and beginning again. The restricted collection, the chamber, the combined magic that Voss described in the kinds of terms usually reserved for things that rewrote what was possible. He thought good. Not because he wanted a fight. Because he had people to fight with. Because the thing he'd been waiting for since he was 7 years old on a school rooftop had arrived and it was better and stranger and more than he'd known how to want. Because the Bond had looked across a marketplace in Lyon and said these ones and it had been right. And they had all of them chosen every step since. And that choosing was the thing, the real thing, the thing that made the difference. When we go back down, Harry said, let's go to the chamber. Yes, Fleur said. We should try the combined casting, Hermione said. Voss's framework. Start simply, basic illumination, see how the anchoring changes it. You've already worked out the theory, Harry said. I've been working out the theory since I read that chapter, Hermione said, unapologetically. What does the theory say happens? Fleur asked. Hermione was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke her voice had the quality it got when she was saying something she knew was true, and was still surprised by its truth. That the light is bigger, she said. Then it should be. Then it has any right to be. Given 3 people and 1 room and the basic casting components. She looked at them both. The anchor doesn't just sustain the bond. It amplifies what the bond makes possible. In Voss's account, the combined illumination filled an entire valley. She paused. For 3 practitioners. In 1 small room. And what we're working with, Harry said, is not a valley, Fleur said. Her voice was dry and warm and entirely her. But it is a start. Harry smiled. It was the genuine kind, the kind that started from somewhere real. The start is always enough, he said. If you're starting in the right direction. They stood on the battlements for a little longer. The cold turned their breath to brief silver clouds. Below them, Hogwarts held them in the old way of places that know what they're for. That understand their function is to protect and challenge and provide space for things to grow into themselves that haven't finished growing yet. Then they went down. Through the castle, through the warm corridors, down to the dungeon level where the wall was already warm before they reached it, because the chamber knew them now the way they knew each other, with the clear and certain recognition of things that have found their right arrangement and intend to keep it. The wall opened. They went down together. The basin lit when all 3 of them stood around it, not showing anything, not reflecting, just warm and alive and present, the light silver gold and steady. The carvings on the walls breathed. The 3 figures in the central panel stood with their hands close and the light between their palms. Ready? Hermione said. Always, said Fleur. Harry looked at the basin, at the walls, at the 2 of them, the people who had been chosen, and who had chosen back, and who were standing in a room that had waited centuries for exactly this. Yes, he said. And they began.